If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. The morning started out beautiful, like a postcard. Golden sunlight poured through the red maple leaves, making the forest glow. I breathed in the crisp mountain air as I walked my usual path through the Adirondack woods. This was my daily patrol. Checking tracks, looking for signs of wildlife, making sure everything was as it should be. My name's Michael O'Connor. Mick to everyone who knows me. I've been a park ranger here for almost 15 years now. After what I saw in the war, the quiet of these mountains was exactly what I needed. At least that's what I thought. I stopped to write in my notebook about some deer tracks when I noticed something odd. The birds had stopped singing. Not gradually, like when a hawk flies over. They all just went silent at once, like someone had flipped a switch. The forest never gets that quiet naturally. That's when I saw it. An enormous white pine tree, older than anything I'd seen before. But what made my skin crawl were the carvings. They covered the trunk, hundreds of faces frozen. In pain, their mouths open in silent screams. I'd walked this trail 1,000 times and never seen this tree before. I reached out to touch one of the faces when the air suddenly changed. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. 20 degrees colder in seconds. Dark clouds rolled in, turning the golden morning almost night dark. My radio crackled with static, making me jump. Through the noise, I heard fragments of a voice. Lost, cold, something following us. Help. Then nothing but dead air. I recognized the voice. Belonged to one of the hikers reported missing 2 days ago. A strange mist began rising from the ground, thick and white. It moved wrong, flowing against the wind, almost like it had a mind of its own. I've spent my life in these woods, and I've never seen fog behave like that. As I tried to radio back to the station, I spotted something else that turned my blood to ice. About 50 feet up in a tree hung the body of a deer, strung up like it had been placed there deliberately. No animal I know could lift a deer that high, and from what I could see, its insides were missing. I pulled out my compass, but the needle just spun in wild circles, useless. I knew these woods better than anyone, but suddenly, nothing looked familiar. The trails seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. And the cold. This wasn't regular autumn cold. This cut straight through my heavy jacket, through my skin, right down to my bones. The kind of cold that doesn't just make you shiver, it makes you forget what being warm ever felt like. I needed to get back to the station to report what I'd found. But as I turned to head back, I realized I wasn't sure which way back was anymore. The forest I'd known my entire life had become a stranger to me in minutes, and somewhere deep among the trees, I could swear I heard something moving. Something big. Sometimes when things get scary, my mind takes me back to Iwo Jima, that black sand beach where I watched my friends die. I survived by hiding under their bodies, feeling their blood soak into my uniform while I held my breath. The things I saw there never really left me. After the war, I couldn't stand being around people much. That's when I met Joseph Two Rivers, an Algonquin elder who taught me how to truly live in the wilderness, how to read the trees and the wind, how to move through the forest without making a sound. Those were good days. I reached into my pocket and felt my brother Tommy's silver pocket watch. He carried it the day he took a bullet meant for me. The watch stopped the bullet just enough, killed him, saved me. I carry it everywhere now. 73 days. That's how long I'd been sober. Longest stretch in years. The bottle was my friend after the divorce. Clara couldn't handle my screaming in the night or the way I'd sometimes stare at nothing for hours. Can't blame her for leaving folks around. Here call me the ghost, because I can track anything through these mountains. Lost hikers, runaway kids, missing pets. If they're in my forest, I find them. Always. At least until now. Last night I had the dream again. Something hunting me through these same woods. I never see it clearly, just feel it getting closer and closer until I wake up, gasping for air. Been having that dream more often lately. The only person in town I really talk to is Thomas Wilson. He runs the general store at the edge of the park. 80 years old and sharp as a tack. Brings me supplies sometimes when the snow gets too deep for me to come down the mountain. "You're looking haunted again, Mick," he told me last week when I picked up my supplies. "Something's not right up there. I can feel it." I brushed him off. Told him it was just the weather changing, making my old injuries ache. But the truth is, I've felt it too. Something watching. Something waiting. The rangers have been getting more missing persons reports than usual. 3 hikers last month, a family of 4 who never checked in at their campsite. I found them all, eventually. But this latest group, 5 college kids, from New York City, they've been gone 4 days now. For the first time in my career, I'm not sure I want to find what happened to them. As I stood there in the suddenly unfamiliar forest, compass spinning wildly, I realized I should have listened to that feeling in my gut, the one that had been warning me for weeks that something was wrong in my mountains. I took a deep breath and tried to focus. If I couldn't use the compass, I'd navigate by the sun. Except the sun was now completely hidden behind those unnatural black clouds. I'd have to rely on my knowledge of the land, the slope of the ground, the direction of water flow. But first, I needed to find those hikers. That broken radio call might be the only chance they had left. And finding lost people is what I do best, even when everything inside me is screaming to run in the opposite direction. I hiked for about an hour, following what I thought was the direction of that radio call. The forest kept getting darker and colder. My breath made thick clouds in front of my face. That's when I stumbled into a small clearing and found the campsite. A blue tent was still standing, though the top was heavy with frost. A small fire. Pit had food still sitting on the cooking grate, beans in a pot half eaten. The weird part, the beans were still warm, steam rising from them despite the freezing air. "Hello?" I called out. "Park Ranger O'Connor. Anyone here?" No answer. Just the strange, heavy silence of the woods. I knelt down to check the ground and felt my heart skip. There were footprints in the soft earth, but they weren't normal. They were huge, maybe twice the size of my boot. The shape was almost human, but the toes were all wrong, spread too far apart and curved like claws. The tracks led away from the camp, deeper into the forest. As I stared at them, trying to make sense of what animal could have made them, I heard something that made me freeze. Mick, help me. I'm hurt." Clara's voice. My ex-wife, who I knew for a fact was living in Albany, 3 hours away. "Mick, please, I'm so cold." Her voice was coming from the trees in the same direction as those strange tracks. I knew it. Couldn't be her. It couldn't be, but it sounded exactly like Clara, down to the way she said my name. Near the edge of the camp, something caught my eye. A small teddy bear, the kind you'd give a child. I picked it up and nearly dropped it when I saw the marks. Teeth marks all over it. Human-sized teeth marks that had torn through the fabric to the stuffing. I put the bear down slowly and kept looking around the campsite. The trees surrounding the clearing were strange, too. The bark had been stripped off in perfect spiral patterns, like someone had taken the time to carefully peel it with a knife. Too perfect to be an animal. I tried my water canteen, but found it had started to freeze, ice crystals forming inside, despite being tucked inside my jacket for warmth. The temperature was dropping even further, and I watched frost patterns spread across the tent fabric, like living things. Under a pile of firewood, I found an old leather journal. The first page had a date, October 1887. The handwriting was faded, but readable. The cold comes with it, unnaturally cold. 3 men missing now. We hear their voices at night, calling from the woods, but when we search, we find nothing. Matthews saw something yesterday by the tall pine, said it walked like a man, but was not a man. Tonight we will... The entry ended there. A logging camp, from the details in the journal. The whole camp had vanished that winter, according to stories I'd heard. Over 30 men gone without a trace. As I put the journal in my pocket, I noticed something else strange. Animals were moving through the underbrush all around me, all heading in the same direction, away from where those strange tracks led. Rabbits, foxes, even a pair of deer, all running together. Predator and prey, side by side like they'd forgotten their natural order. I stood very still, watching them flee. Then I saw the symbols, carved into the trees around the campsite, strange angular marks that seemed to shift slightly when I moved my head, like they were changing when I wasn't looking, directly at them. That's when I knew I had to find those hikers fast. Whatever was happening here wasn't natural. Not a bear, not a wolf, not anything I'd been trained to deal with. I took a deep breath, checked my rifle, and started following those inhuman tracks, trying very hard not to think about why I could still hear Clara's voice, now whispering my name over and over from just beyond the next line of trees. I followed the strange tracks for about 2 miles. The forest kept changing around me. Trails I'd walked for 20 years suddenly dead-ended at rock walls that I'd never seen before. Landmarks appeared in places they shouldn't be. It was like the woods themselves were playing tricks on me. The sun should have been high overhead by now, but the sky stayed dark. My watch said it was 2:15 p.m., but it felt like dusk. That's when I heard real human voices ahead. I moved carefully toward the sound, keeping my rifle ready. In a small clearing stood 4 people huddled around a meager fire. They looked up as I approached, eyes wide with fear, until they saw my ranger uniform. "Thank God," said a tall man with glasses and a short beard. "Are you with the search party?" "I am the search party," I said. "Park Ranger Michael O'Connor. Are you friends with the missing hikers?" The tall man nodded and stepped forward. "James Peterson, geology professor at Cornell. These are the Williams twins, Peter and Paul." He pointed to 2 athletic-looking men in matching blue jackets. "And Maria Vasquez. She's a nurse from Albany Medical." Maria had dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Have you found any sign of our friends? They've been missing for almost a week now." "I found their camp," I said, "but they weren't there. How long have you 4 been looking?" 3 days, Peter Williams said. His voice had an edge to it. "And we keep ending up back in this same clearing no matter which direction we walk." "It's impossible." His twin brother Paul nodded. "Something's not right in these woods, Ranger. Listen to this." He pulled out a small tape recorder and pressed play. At first, there was just normal forest sounds. Wind, leaves rustling. Then came a strange noise that made the hair on my neck stand up. A rhythmic clicking like bones tapping together, getting louder and louder until it suddenly stopped. "We heard this the night before our friends disappeared," Paul said. "They went to investigate and never came back." Professor Peterson pulled a book from his backpack. "I've been researching local legends. The Algonquin people who lived here centuries ago spoke of a winter spirit that feeds on human suffering. They called it the hunger that walks." "That's just stories," Peter said sharply. "We need to focus on finding our friends, not ghost stories." "We've been walking in circles for 3 days." Peterson snapped back. "Does that feel normal to you?" I could feel the tension between them. They were scared, tired, and starting to turn on each other. "Have any of you seen anything unusual?" I asked carefully. They looked at each other, no one wanting to speak first. Finally, Maria stepped forward. "My daughter," she said quietly. "My little girl, Isabella. She died 3 years ago in a car accident. But I've been seeing her at the edge of our camp every night, standing there watching us." Her voice broke. "I know it can't be real, but it looks exactly like her." The twins exchanged worried glances. I could tell they thought Maria was losing it. "We found this yesterday," Peterson said, handing me a battered backpack. It belonged to Carlos, one of our missing friends. Inside was a journal. The last entry read, "It knows what we're afraid of. It can see inside our heads." God help me, I think it's wearing Dave's face now, but Dave is dead. I watched it take him. If you find this, run. The sun was starting to set for real now. The forest grew darker around us. "We need to make camp for the night," I said. "Stay together, keep the fire going." "I'll take first watch," Paul Williams volunteered. We set up a simple camp. The 5 of us ate a quiet dinner of canned beans and trail mix. Nobody talked much. We were all listening to the forest, waiting for that clicking sound to start again. The others tried to sleep. I noticed strange ice formations starting to form on the trees around us, delicate crystalline patterns spreading across the bark. Despite it not being nearly cold enough for that kind of frost, I checked my watch again, 8:30 p.m. But when I glanced at Peterson's watch while he slept, it read 3:15 a.m. Something was very wrong with time in these woods. I stayed awake, watching the darkness beyond our little fire, feeling more certain by the minute that we were not alone out here. Something was watching us, waiting for its moment. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, Peter was shaking me awake, his face pale in the dying firelight. "Paul's gone," he whispered, voice shaking. "He was on watch, and now he's gone." I sat up quickly, fully awake now. "When did you last see him?" "Maybe 2 hours ago. I woke up and he wasn't by the fire. I've been looking around the camp, but..." Peter held up a pair of boots. Paul's boots. "I found these by the edge of the clearing. They're full of frost, like they've been in a freezer." I grabbed my flashlight and examined the boots. The frost inside wasn't melting, even when I held them close to the fire. It was black, like no ice I'd ever seen before. We woke the others and organized a search. The forest was pitch black, the kind of darkness that swallows your flashlight. Beam after just a few feet. We called Paul's name, but our voices sounded flat, like the trees were absorbing the sound. "Look at this," Maria called from the edge of our camp. She was pointing at the ground with her flashlight. A trail of ice patches led away from our campsite, perfectly round circles of frost every few feet, like footprints. We followed the ice trail deeper into the woods. The cold got worse with each step, biting through our clothes. After about a quarter mile, the trail ended at something I still can't explain. Massive stone formations jutted from the ground in a perfect circle. They looked like giant teeth rising from the earth, each one taller than a man. In the center of the circle stood a single dead tree, its branches reaching out like twisted arms. "I've hiked these mountains my whole life," I said, my breath making clouds in the freezing air. "I've never seen this place before." Peterson ran his hand over one of the stone teeth. "These aren't natural formations. They're too regular, too precise." As we stood there, I noticed something odd about Peterson. His beard, which had been neatly trimmed yesterday, now looked weeks longer. And when I glanced at my watch, it read 11:45 p.m. But the sky was starting to lighten like dawn was approaching. "Time is wrong here," I said quietly. "Look at your watches." Each of us had a different time. Maria's watch had stopped completely. That's when we saw it. The moon broke through the clouds, casting silver light across the clearing. On the far side, between 2 of the stone teeth, stood a figure. It was impossibly tall, at least 9 feet, impossibly thin, with limbs too long for its body. And its head. Its head was like a deer skull, antlers branching out against the night sky. We all froze. The thing tilted its head at an angle no human neck could manage, like it was studying us. "Don't move," I whispered. "Nobody move." Peter raised his flashlight. Slowly. The beam passed over the creature, and for a split second I saw its skin, translucent, like cloudy plastic, with dark shapes moving underneath. Then it was gone. Not running away, not hiding. Just there one moment and gone the next, like someone had switched off a projector. "Did everyone see that?" I asked, my mouth dry. They all nodded except Peterson. He was staring at the spot where the creature had been, a strange look on his face. "James." Maria touched his arm. "Are you okay?" "I heard my wife," he said dreamily. "She's waiting for me over there." He pointed toward the dark woods. "Your wife died 10 years ago," Peter said sharply. "You told us that yesterday." Peterson shook his head like he was trying to clear it. "No, she's right there. Can't you see her?" Before we could stop him, he took 3 steps toward the woods. Then he stopped and screamed, a sound I'll never forget, pure terror and pain mixed together. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. When he looked up at us again, something had changed in his eyes. They were darker, emptier. He smiled, but it wasn't his smile anymore. "We should go back to camp," he said, his voice flat. "It's not safe here." As we walked back, I noticed Peterson didn't blink. Not once. And he stayed at the back of our group, always just a few steps behind us. The temperature kept dropping. My breath came out in clouds so thick I could barely see through them. When we reached camp, I noticed something in my small shaving mirror that I'd left out. A reflection of something tall standing right behind our group. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Nothing I could see directly anyway. Maria grabbed my arm. "Don't look at it straight on," she whispered. "It can only be seen in reflections." That's when I knew for certain. The thing that had taken Paul was now hunting the rest of us. And somehow, it had already gotten to Peterson. None of us slept that night. We kept the fire going, sitting in a tight circle with our backs to each other. Peterson sat a little apart from us, staring into the woods with that empty smile. By morning, if you could call it morning when the sky barely lightened, Maria's hands had turned black with frostbite, despite her gloves. She was a nurse. She knew what frostbite looked like. This was different. "It's spreading up my arms," she said, trying to stay calm. "This isn't normal frostbite. It's too fast." Peter kept looking at his brother's empty sleeping bag. I could see him unraveling, his eyes darting at every sound from the forest. "We need to get back to the ranger station," I said. "I've got a radio there, supplies, weapons." "We've been trying to get out of here for days," Peter snapped. "These woods don't make sense anymore." I pulled out my map, trying to find our location, but the landmarks didn't match up with anything around us. It was like we were in a completely different forest. "Mick," Maria said suddenly, looking at Peterson. "Look at his arm." Peterson had rolled up his sleeve. He was carving those same strange symbols we'd seen on the trees into his own skin with a pocket knife. The cuts weren't bleeding. They were filling with that same black frost. "James, stop that!" Peter tried to grab the knife, but Peterson moved with unnatural speed. "The cold one is coming," Peterson said. His voice changed, deeper. "It needs to feed. 7 souls, 7 bodies. It's hungry." "What happened to Paul?" I demanded, grabbing Peterson by the collar. "What did you do to him?" Peterson just smiled. "Paul saw his mother in the woods. He followed her. The hunger wears the faces of those we miss the most." I shoved him away, disgusted. Whatever was speaking through Peterson now wasn't human. As the day wore on, things got worse. Peter found a hunting knife in his pack and started waving it around, accusing Maria of being infected too. "Look at her hands," he shouted. "It's spreading. She's turning into one of them." Maria backed away, frightened. "Peter, please, I'm still me. I'm still Maria." "We're all changing," I said, trying to calm him down. "This place is messing with our heads." And it was. I kept seeing flashes of memory that couldn't be real. Me as a child, following something, tall and thin through these same woods. My grandfather pulling me back, screaming at me to run. Around noon, we found something that made no sense. We'd been walking for hours, trying to find our way out of the forest, when we stumbled into a clearing and saw my ranger station, the same one I thought was miles and miles away. "This is impossible," I said, unlocking the door with shaking hands. "We shouldn't be anywhere near here." Inside, everything was covered in a thin layer of frost. The temperature was even colder in here than outside. My radio was dead, the batteries frozen solid and cracked open. On my desk, someone had arranged pine needles to form one of those strange symbols. That's when we found the bodies. They were in the small storage room at the back. The 5 missing hikers, frozen solid, their skin blue-gray. But when Maria touched one, her nurse's training kicking in, she jerked back in horror. "They're still warm inside," she whispered. "The outside is frozen solid, but their organs are liquefied." Peterson started laughing. Not his normal laugh, but a high, broken sound. "It doesn't eat the meat," he said, that awful smile still on his face. "It eats the warmth, the life, the fear, drains them from the inside out." Peter lunged at Peterson. With the knife, I grabbed his arm just in time. "He's one of them," Peter screamed. "Can't you see it? It's wearing his face, but it's not him anymore." I wasn't sure Peter was wrong. But killing Peterson wouldn't help us. "We need to stick together," I said firmly. "That's our only chance." But I was starting to think we had no chance at all. Because each night the forest got colder, and each night I could feel the thing with the deer skull head getting closer to our camp, testing us, learning what we feared most, and worst of all, I was starting to remember things. Things my mind had locked away. The summer I was 7 years old, playing in these woods. A tall, thin shadow, asking me to follow it deep into the trees. My grandfather dragging me home, performing strange rituals around our cabin with smoke and fire, whispering words in a language I didn't understand. "It always comes back," my grandfather had told me. "Every 50 years, when the winter comes early, the hunger wakes up and it needs to feed." As night fell, the cold became unbearable. Not just cold on your skin, but cold in your soul. The kind of cold that makes you forget that warmth ever existed. We huddled in the ranger station, watching the darkness deepen outside the windows. Something was coming. We could all feel it. Even Peter had gone quiet, the knife still clutched in his shaking hand. We were running out of time. I was searching through the ranger station's old file cabinet when I found it. A leather journal so old the pages had turned yellow. It was hidden in a secret compartment at the bottom of the drawer, wrapped in oilcloth. The first entry was dated 1813. "I found this," I said, bringing it to where Maria sat by our small fire. Her hands were worse, the blackness now past her wrists. But her mind was still sharp. "What is it?" she asked as I carefully opened the brittle pages. "I think it's a record of whatever's happening to us. Someone wanted to make sure it wasn't forgotten." I read aloud from the journal. It told the story of a trapper named Ezekiel Blackwood who got stranded in these mountains during the winter of 1813. His hunting party died one by one as food ran out. Ezekiel turned to eating his dead companions to survive. But something happened to him. The journal described how he changed, growing taller, thinner, hungrier for something more than food. How his skin turned clear like ice, showing his blackened insides. "He became the Wendigo," Maria whispered. "It's an Algonquin legend, a spirit of hunger and winter. If a person eats human flesh, the Wendigo spirit can possess them. Listen to this part," I said, turning to a later page. "The creature is bound to the sacred circle of stones. It cannot leave these woods. Fire weakens it. The old rituals can bind it again, but not destroy it. It will sleep for 50 years after it feeds on 7 souls. Then it will wake again, hungry." Peter, who had been sitting silently in the corner, suddenly spoke up. "This is insane. You both sound crazy." "Keep reading," Maria urged, ignoring him. The journal continued, describing cycles of disappearances every 50 years. 1863, 1913, 1963, 2013, I whispered. "This year." "Look at the name on the last entry," Maria said, pointing to the final page. The handwriting was shaky, but I recognized it immediately. "Joseph O'Connor," I read aloud. "My grandfather." Memory hit me like a punch. I remembered now, my grandfather bringing me to these woods when I was just a boy. using me as bait to draw out the creature. He had performed some kind of ritual, but something went wrong. He died before he could finish it. The Wendigo marked you, Maria said quietly. That's why you were drawn to these mountains after the war. Why you became a ranger here. It's been waiting for you to return. Peterson laughed from the doorway where he stood watch. The hunger remembers those who escape it. It wants them most. Of all, I kept reading. 7 victims complete the cycle. After the 7th, it grows strong enough to take physical form. Then it must return to its hibernation place before the winter solstice, or it will be trapped outside forever. Maria pulled a small book from her pocket, some kind of old text with faded writing. I found this in my backpack this morning. I don't remember packing it. The book was written in a language I didn't recognize, but Maria somehow could read. In parts of it, it's an Algonquin text, she explained. My grandmother was half Algonquin. She taught me some words when I was little. She pointed to a phrase repeated throughout the text. This means the hunger walks between worlds, wearing the faces of the devoured. How do we stop it? Peter demanded, finally joining our conversation. Maria turned pages slowly. There's a ritual. Something about binding the spirit back to its sleeping place. It requires fire, sacred herbs, and... She hesitated. A blood sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? I asked. Someone who has resisted the Wendigo before, she said, looking at me. Someone it has marked. I felt cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Me. Not necessarily death, Maria clarified quickly, but blood freely given at the place where it sleeps. And where's that? Peter asked. I knew the answer before Maria found it in the text. The frozen pond, I said. The one my grandfather always warned me to stay away from as a child. It's about 3 miles north of here. Peterson moved with that unnatural quickness again, suddenly standing right beside us. The hunger grows stronger with each feeding, he said, his voice no longer his own. 5 hikers. Paul makes 6. 1 more to complete the cycle. We need to find this pond, Maria said. Fast, before it can take another victim. I stood up, my decision made. We leave at first light. I'll get the supplies we need. Searching through the station, I found an old wooden box hidden under a floorboard. Inside were the things my grandfather had used in his ritual. Dried herbs tied with red string, a silver knife with strange markings, and a small pouch of what looked like salt, but wasn't. As I gathered these items, I remembered something else. The silver pocket watch that had belonged to my brother. The watch that had saved my life in the war. My grandfather had given it to Tommy before he enlisted, telling him it would keep the cold away. I pulled it from my pocket, opening the case. Inside, stuck to the metal, was a small dark stain, my brother's blood from the day he died. The final piece needed for the ritual. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the ranger station like a living thing. Through the frosted window, I caught a glimpse of something tall moving between the trees, its antlered head tilted towards our shelter. It knew what we were planning, and it wasn't going to make it easy. Dawn never really came. The sky lightened just enough to see, but the sun stayed hidden behind thick, black clouds. The temperature had dropped so low that our breath froze in the air, falling to the ground like snow. We need to get moving, I said, packing the ritual items into my backpack. The pond is about 3 miles north, but in these conditions, it could take us all day. Maria's hands were getting worse. The black frost had spread past her elbows now. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore, but she refused to stay behind. I need to complete the translation of the ritual, she said, tucking the Algonquin book into her coat. No one else can read it. Peter checked his knife and the flare gun he'd found in the ranger station's emergency kit. What about him? He asked, nodding toward Peterson, who stood perfectly still by the window, that empty smile still on his face. We bring him, I said. We might need him. He's not Peterson anymore, Peter argued. That thing is inside him now. Exactly, I replied, which means he might lead us right to where we need to go. Outside, the forest had transformed overnight. Every tree was covered in a thick layer of that strange black frost. The ground crunched under our boots, frozen solid. Even the air felt brittle, like it might shatter if you moved too quickly. Peterson walked ahead, never seeming to feel the cold. He moved differently now, jerky, like a puppet on strings. I kept my rifle aimed at his back, not trusting whatever. Was wearing my friend's skin. The ritual needs to be performed at the pond, Maria explained as we hiked. We need to create a circle of fire around it. The sacred herbs need to be burned at the 4 compass points. And my blood, I asked. She nodded grimly. Mixed with your brother's from the watch. It needs to be freely given on the ice of the pond itself. What happens after that? Peter wanted to know. Maria hesitated. The text isn't clear. It binds the Wendigo back to its sleeping place for another 50 years. But there's a cost to the person who completes the ritual. Of course there is, I said, not really surprised. Nothing was ever free, especially not when it came to fighting monsters. We walked for hours through the frozen landscape. The forest kept changing around us, paths appearing and disappearing, landmarks shifting when we weren't looking directly at them. But Peterson never hesitated, walking with purpose like he knew exactly where he was going. I checked my brother's watch. The hands were spinning backwards now, time itself breaking down around us. Look, Peter suddenly whispered, pointing through the trees. About 50 yards away stood a small figure in a red coat. A little girl with dark hair watching us. Isabella, Maria gasped. My daughter! Before we could stop her, Maria took 3 steps toward the child. The little girl smiled and turned, walking deeper into the forest. Maria, stop! I grabbed her arm. It's not your daughter, it's trying to separate us. Tears froze on Maria's cheeks. She looked so real. That's how it hunts, I said. It finds what you miss most and uses it against you. We continued on, more cautious now. The forest grew quieter with each step, the normal sounds of birds and wind completely gone. The only noise was our breathing and the crunch of our footsteps. Peter worked on the flare guns, carefully opening the cartridges and mixing the chemicals with the sacred herbs I'd brought. If fire weakens it, these might buy us some time, he explained. Peterson suddenly stopped walking. We're here, he said, his voice hollow. We pushed through a line of dead trees and saw it, a perfectly circular pond, maybe 100 feet across, frozen solid. The ice was black, not white or blue like normal ice. Around the pond stood more of those tooth-like stone formations, forming a complete circle. The hibernation place, Maria whispered. The air here was so cold it burned to breathe. My lungs ached with each breath. Even Peter, who had been holding up well, started to shiver uncontrollably. We need to work fast, I said. Maria, where do we place the herbs? She opened the Algonquin book with her blackened hands, struggling to turn the pages. North, south, east, and west around the pond. We build fires at each point using wood. From the oldest trees, we began gathering dead branches, working quickly. The light was already fading again, though it couldn't have been past noon. 4 fires to form the barrier, Maria read. The one who bears the mark must stand at the center of the ice. The blood of the marked one, mixed with the blood of kin, completes the seal. I pulled out my brother's watch, holding it tightly. I'm ready. That's when Peterson began to change. His skin stretched and tore, growing translucent. His limbs elongated, joints bending in impossible directions. His face, melted is the only word I can use, revealing the skull-like features beneath. Peter, light the fires now, I shouted, pushing Maria behind me. Peter ran to each pile of wood, lighting them with matches from the ranger station. The flames caught, unnaturally fast, blazing up in columns of fire that burned blue instead of orange. The thing that had been Peterson let out a sound, not a roar or a scream, but a high, thin clicking noise that vibrated in my bones. The same sound from Paul's tape recorder. "It knows what we're doing," Maria called over the wind that had suddenly kicked up. "Mick, you need to get to the center of the pond." I took a step toward the frozen black water, then froze as figures emerged from the trees all around us. The 5 missing hikers, Paul Williams and others I didn't recognize, all walking with that same jerky puppet motion, their skin translucent, showing blackened organs beneath. 7 souls, the Peterson thing clicked. The hunger is almost complete. The wind whipped into a frenzy, swirling snow around us in blinding sheets. The 4 fires blazed against the darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to move with minds. "Of their own, I'll hold them off," Peter shouted, raising the modified flare gun. "Get to the center of the pond." I grabbed Maria's arm, helping her toward the ice as the 7 possessed victims closed in around us. Their movements were wrong. Too fast, too jerky, like broken film footage. "The ritual," I yelled over the wind. "What do I need to say?" Maria clutched the book, her blackened fingers struggling to turn the pages. "It's a chant in Algonquin." "I'll have to teach you the words!" We stepped onto the black ice. It didn't feel like normal ice. It was warm under our boots, almost soft, like it was alive somehow. Behind us, Peter fired the flare gun. A streak of red light hit one of the possessed hikers square in the chest. Where it struck, the skin bubbled and hissed, revealing more of the blackness underneath. The creature screamed, not a human sound, but that awful bone-clicking noise. "It's working," Peter shouted, loading another flare. I pulled Maria toward the center of the pond. The ice creaked beneath us, shifting slightly like it was breathing. The Peterson thing moved with blinding speed, its body now fully transformed. It stood 9 feet tall, skin stretched tight over an impossibly thin frame. The deer skull head tilted at an unnatural angle, empty eye sockets somehow still watching. "Us quick, the words," I said to Maria as we reached the center of the pond. She opened the book, her hands shaking. "Repeat after me, Wendigo Wache Ngake Wenda." I tried to follow her pronunciation, stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds. The wind seemed to fight against the words, tearing them from my mouth. Peter screamed. I turned to see the possessed victims overpowering him, their dead eyes fixed on his face. He fired the flare gun one last time, hitting the Peterson thing in its chest. It staggered back, that clicking sound rising to a terrible pitch. "Peter!" I shouted, but it was too late. The creatures dragged him into the trees, his screams suddenly cut short. "Keep going," Maria urged, her voice breaking. "The ritual is our only chance." I continued the chant, feeling the words burn in my throat like fire. With each phrase, the ice beneath us pulsed, dark shapes moving under its surface. The Peterson thing recovered from the flare and moved onto the ice. Each step it took made the surface crack slightly, dark water welling up through the fissures. "The blood," Maria said urgently. "You need to mix your blood with your brother's now." I pulled out the silver pocket watch and the ritual knife. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the watch case. Time seemed to stretch and compress around us. One moment the creature was yards away. The next, it was almost upon us. Maria stood between me and it, holding up the Algonquin. "Book like a shield, Ngapatchi Wendigo," she shouted, her voice stronger than I thought possible given her condition. The creature hesitated, its deer skull head tilting in confusion. I pressed the knife against my palm and cut deeply, feeling strangely calm as my blood welled up black in the freezing air. I let it drip onto the watch face, mixing with the decades-old stain of my brother's blood. "Now what?" I asked Maria. "Place it on the ice and finish the chant," she said, her eyes never leaving the Peterson thing. I knelt down, placing the bloody watch on the black ice. The final words of the chant felt like they were being torn from my very soul, each syllable burning like acid. The creature let out a piercing scream and lunged at us. Maria threw herself forward, intercepting it before it could reach me. "Finish it!" she cried as the thing's long fingers wrapped around her throat. I pressed my bleeding hand against the watch and spoke the final words of the ritual. The ice beneath us shattered. Everything happened at once. The black water surged up around us. The four fires at the edges of the pond shot 50 feet into the air, forming a dome of blue flame. Maria and the creature were locked together, sinking into the dark. Water. I tried to grab her, but my hands passed right through her body, like she was made of smoke. "It's okay, Mick," she said, her voice strangely peaceful as the blackness from her hands spread across her entire body. "This is how it has to be." The ice collapsed beneath me, and I plunged into the freezing water, but it wasn't water. It was thicker, more like oil, and it burned like fire wherever it touched my skin. I saw shapes moving in the blackness, hundreds of faces all frozen in silent screams. The pond wasn't just the Wendigo's hibernation place. It was where it kept all its victims, preserved forever in this in-between state, neither alive nor dead. The Peterson thing thrashed in the black liquid, its body dissolving and reforming, caught between human and monster. Maria had wrapped her arms around it, her entire body now black as coal, her eyes the only part of her still recognizable. "Go!" she mouthed at me as they sank deeper. I tried to swim toward the surface, but the liquid kept pulling me down. My lungs burned for air. The world started to go dark around the edges. Then I felt something grab my collar, a hand, pulling me up. My last thought before losing consciousness was of my grandfather, how he had tried to finish this same ritual 40 years ago, how he had failed, and how now I might have failed too. I woke up in a hospital bed. The steady beep of monitors filled the room. Bright lights hurt my eyes after so many days in the darkness of those woods. "He's awake," someone said. A nurse hurried over, checking my vitals. "Where am I?" My voice sounded strange, raspy, like I hadn't used it in weeks. "Adirondack Regional Hospital," she replied. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. You're lucky to be alive." Lucky wasn't the word I would have chosen. The memories came flooding back. The black pond. Maria sacrificing herself. Peter being dragged away by those things. I tried to sit up, but pain shot through my body. "Easy there," said a familiar voice. Thomas Wilson, the old store owner, stood in the doorway. "You've been through quite an ordeal, Mick." "Thomas? How did I get here?" He pulled a chair beside my bed. "Search and rescue found you half frozen by the edge of Miller's Pond. No sign of the others." He leaned closer. "They're saying exposure, maybe hallucinations from the cold, but I know better." I looked down at my hands and froze. Patches of my skin had turned translucent, the veins underneath darker than they should be. I could see the bones of my fingers when I held them up to the light. "It's not over," I whispered. Thomas nodded grimly. "Your grandfather had the same marks. After his encounter in '63, a doctor came in then, clipboard in hand. Mr. O'Connor, you're a medical miracle. Your core temperature was so low you should have been dead, yet here you are." "The others," I said. "Did they find anyone else?" The doctor's face fell. "I'm sorry. We found 2 bodies. The medical examiner is still... well, they're having trouble determining cause of death. The bodies were frozen on the outside, but their insides were like liquid." I finished for him. He looked surprised. "Yes, how did you know?" I didn't answer. I couldn't explain what had happened out there. No one would believe me. 3 weeks later, they finally released me from the hospital. The official report said that a freak cold snap had caught our group unprepared. Hypothermia, leading to confusion and death. Case closed, but I knew better. I returned to my cabin at the edge of the park. I couldn't bring myself to go. Back to the ranger station. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The changes in my body continued. The transparent patches spread slowly. Sometimes I would wake up at night, feeling hungry in a way food couldn't satisfy. And sometimes when I looked in the mirror, I thought I saw something else looking back at me from behind my eyes. I began having visions, flashes of Maria and Peter trapped in that black pond, their faces frozen in pain, and through their eyes I could see the creature, dormant but not dead, curled at the bottom of the pond like a spider at the center of its web. I found a calendar and did the math. The cycle had been interrupted, the ritual incomplete. Instead of 50 years of peace, we might have bought 20, maybe 30 at most. I knew what I had to do with whatever time we had left. I had to find a permanent solution. My grandfather had tried and failed. I had tried and only partly succeeded, but I wouldn't give up. In my dreams I could feel the hunger growing again, waiting beneath the ice, not dead, just sleeping. And in those dreams I heard Maria's voice, teaching me the words I would need when the time came. I started a journal, recording everything I remembered about what happened in those woods. Every detail of the ritual, every word of the chant. I searched for more information about the Wendigo, contacting experts, collecting books and artifacts. On my desk sits my brother's silver pocket watch, now tarnished black where our blood mixed. And beside it, a calendar with a date circled in red, October 2058, 50 years after my encounter. The next cycle, when the hunger would wake again, but I won't be there to face it. By then, I'll be an old man if I'm alive at all. So I prepare, gathering knowledge, training those who might listen. I've dedicated my life to making sure the next time the Wendigo wakes, someone will be ready for it. Sometimes at night, when the wind is strong and the temperature drops suddenly, I feel it reaching for me across the years. The hunger that walks between worlds, and deep in my changed body, part of me reaches back. Last week I found Thomas Wilson's grandson, a smart kid with sharp eyes who reminds me of myself at that age. I've started teaching him the old words, showing him the signs to watch for. Because one day the cold will come early again, the birds will go silent, and the hunger will wake. But next time, we'll be ready. As I write this final entry in my journal, I look out the window at the first snow falling. Winter comes earlier every year now, and in the shadow of the falling flakes, I sometimes catch a glimpse of something tall and thin watching me from the edge of the forest, waiting, hungry. My name is Eleanor Washington, but everyone calls me Ellie. I've been a park ranger at the Okefenokee Swamp for almost 5 years now. I love this place, the way the Spanish moss hangs from the cypress trees, the chorus of frogs at dusk, the gentle ripple of water as an alligator slides beneath the surface. But this summer, everything changed. The drought came first. Not your regular dry spell, but the worst one in 50 years. The water dropped so low, you could see things that had been underwater for decades. Cypress knees, those woody bumps that grow up from the roots, stuck out of the mud like bony fingers reaching for the sky. Boat channels that used to be 10 feet deep were now just muddy trails. I was out on patrol in my airboat one evening in late June. The sun was setting, turning the remaining pools of water blood red. Something felt wrong. The swamp was too quiet. No frogs singing, no insects buzzing, just silence. Ranger Washington checking in, I said into my radio. Nothing but static came back. I tried again. This time I heard something like whispers buried in the static, but I couldn't make out any words. I steered my airboat around a bend I'd never been able to access before the drought. That's when I saw it. Something that shouldn't have been there. Stone walls arranged in a square, rising just above the mud. It looked ancient, like some kind of temple. My compass started spinning wildly when I pointed it toward the structure. Tied up my boat and stepped carefully onto the exposed mud. The moss near the stone structure seemed different, more vibrant green despite the drought. And when my boot brushed against it, I swear it moved slightly, like it was breathing, as I got closer to the stone structure. I felt a chill, despite the Georgia summer heat. I'd grown up hearing all the old stories about the swamp. Things that lived in the water, things that hunted at night. My mother gave me a cypress wood pendant when I took this job, said it would keep the swamp spirits away. I found myself clutching it now. I took some photos and water samples near the structure. The water felt strange between my fingers, thicker than it should be, with a metallic taste when a drop accidentally touched my lips. I decided to come back tomorrow with better equipment. That night, I dreamed of my little brother again. Michael drowned in this same swamp when I was 12 and he was 8. I was supposed to be watching him. In my dream, he was calling me from beneath dark water, but when I reached in to save him, something else grabbed my hand. I woke up in a cold sweat. My dog, Rex, was howling outside my cabin. When I went to check on him, he was staring in the direction of the swamp, his hackles raised. "What is it, boy?" I asked, but I already knew something wasn't right. In the direction of the stone structure, I could see faint blue lights, like fireflies but brighter, moving in perfect patterns over the water. Tomorrow, I'd need to investigate, but as I turned to go back inside, I heard it, faint but unmistakable. Singing, beautiful singing coming from the swamp, and despite everything in me saying not to, I wanted to go toward it. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that singing. By morning, I had almost convinced myself it was just the wind or my imagination playing tricks. After my regular radio check-in, I headed back to the stone structure. The water had dropped another few inches overnight, revealing more of the strange building. I brought my camera and sample bags. This time I also brought Rex with me, thinking he'd warn me if anything was wrong. As we got closer, Rex started acting strange. His tail tucked between his legs, and he wouldn't go within 20 feet of the stones. When I tried to lead him closer, he pulled back so hard he slipped his collar and ran back to the boat, barking the whole time. "Some guard dog you are," I muttered. But deep down, his fear worried me. I noticed something floating in the water near the structure. At first, I thought it might be trash. People sometimes leave garbage even in protected places like this. But when I fished it out with a stick, I saw it was some kind of skin, transparent and rubbery, about the size of a large man, too big for any snake or alligator in the swamp. I took photos and carefully put it in a sample bag. While examining the stone walls, I found drawings carved into them, old pictures showing people bowing to a creature that seemed to be half human, half fish. Below them were other images of people having their skin removed. The drawings gave me goosebumps. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Ranger Washington, come in." It was my boss, Ranger Garcia. "Washington here. What's up?" "We've got a situation. Research boat from the university was reported missing yesterday. Last known location is in your sector. Can you check it out?" "On my way," I said, glad for an excuse to leave the stone structure behind. I found the research boat about half a mile from the temple. It was just drifting, engine off. Papers and equipment were scattered on the deck, but no people. I climbed aboard carefully. "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice echoed across the empty swamp. The boat's equipment was still running, laptops open, lights on, like everyone had just vanished in the middle of their work. I found a journal on one of the tables and flipped through it. June 15th. Water. Samples show unusual mineral content. Dr. Chen thinks it might be related to the drought exposing new sediment layers. June 17th. Recording strange sounds at night, almost like singing. June 20th. Parker hasn't been himself since he went swimming yesterday. Keeps staring at the rest of us, not blinking enough. The last entry was from yesterday. June 22nd. They aren't human anymore. The singing is getting closer. My hands started shaking. I called it in and was told to secure the scene and wait for backup. While waiting, I checked the boat's cameras. Most were blank, but one had captured something. A strange shape moving under the water near the boat. Not an alligator, not a human either. Something in between. By the time backup arrived, the sun was setting. Ranger Garcia took one look at the empty boat and the skin sample I'd collected and radioed for police assistance. "You should go home, Ellie," he said. "We've got it from here." But on my way back, I got another call. A local fisherman, Tom Bradley, had been found wandering along the road near the swamp entrance, confused and babbling. Since I had medical training from my Navy days, they wanted me to check him out before the ambulance arrived. I found him sitting on a bench, staring at nothing. His clothes were soaked and he was shivering despite the heat. "Mr. Bradley, I'm Ranger Washington. Can you tell me what happened?" He looked at me with empty eyes. "Me and Joe went fishing at dawn. Found a good spot we never seen before, near some old stones." My stomach tightened. "And then what happened?" Joe changed, started acting weird after he touched the water. "Then at sunset," his voice cracked. "He just peeled his face off, Ranger. Peeled it right off like it was a mask. But underneath wasn't Joe, wasn't anything human. I stayed with him until the ambulance came. The paramedics said he was in shock. That night, I called Judith Harjo. She's a Muskogee elder who lives near the refuge. If anyone would know about the stone structure, it would be her. The drought that reveals," she said when I described what I'd found. "Our stories talk about this. When the waters fall, the skin taker rises." "Skin taker?" I asked, remembering that horrible piece of skin I'd found. "It hunts during the dry times, takes the skins of people to wear like clothes, learns everything they know." Her voice was deadly serious. "My grandmother said it was sealed away long ago, under the water where it couldn't hurt anyone. But if the temple is showing again, what can I do?" I asked. "Nothing tonight. Come see me tomorrow. And Ellie, don't go near the water after dark. If you hear singing, cover your ears and run the other way." After I hung up, I double-checked all my locks. Then I loaded my service pistol and kept it on my nightstand, though I wasn't sure what good it would do against whatever was out there. Just before midnight, my phone rang. It was Ranger Garcia. "Ellie, they found Tom Bradley's body out on Parker's Creek." His voice sounded strange. "What happened to him?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "His skin is gone. All of it, like it was removed in one piece." I didn't sleep at all that night, and outside in the distance I could hear that beautiful singing calling my name. The next morning I went straight to Judith Harjo's house. She lived in a small cabin at the edge of the refuge, surrounded by gardens of herbs and flowers. Despite everything that happened, I felt safer there. Judith made tea while I told her everything: the temple, the skin, Tom Bradley, the missing research team. "The old stories say this happens every 41 years, when the water gets low enough," she said. "The skin taker wakes up hungry." She showed me a book with old drawings that looked just like the carvings on the temple. People with their skin removed, and a creature wearing those skins. "How do we stop it?" I asked. Before she could answer, my radio buzzed. A research team from the university was arriving to investigate the stone structure. I had to go meet them. "Be careful who you trust," Judith warned as I left. "Once it takes someone's skin, you can't tell them apart from the real person. Except..." She handed me a small pouch. "Copper. It can't stand the touch of copper. If you're not sure about someone, find a way to touch them with this." The research team was already setting up camp near the temple when I arrived. There were 4 of them. Dr. James Hoffman, the leader with gray hair and a know-it-all attitude. Dr. Lakshmi Patel, a quiet woman who studied ancient buildings. Marcus Wilson, a young student with glasses, and Richard Davis, a photographer with a friendly smile. Ranger Washington. Dr. Hoffman barely looked at me when I introduced myself. "We'll handle things from here. You can go back to directing tourists." With All due respect, sir, I said, trying to stay calm. 2 people are dead and 3 are missing. This area isn't safe. Superstitious nonsense, he said, waving his hand. We're scientists. Dr. Patel gave me an apologetic look. Perhaps Ranger Washington could share what she's observed. Local knowledge is valuable. I told them about the drought, the strange skin, and the abandoned research boat. I left out the singing and what Judith had told me. They already thought I was just a silly woman with wild stories. Fascinating, Dr. Hoffman said when I mentioned the temple. Pre-Columbian, possibly. We'll begin excavation immediately. I don't think that's a good idea, I said. At least wait until... We don't need your permission, Ranger, he cut me off. We have approval from the university and the Department of Interior. As they unpacked their equipment, Dr. Patel came over to me. I've studied similar structures in South America, she said quietly. They were used for sacrifices to water gods. I think Dr. Hoffman is being too hasty. Later, as the team set up underwater lights to examine the temple, Marcus found me taking water samples. The temple has some weird alignments, he said, showing me his notes. The main doorway points to where the sun rises during a specific drought cycle that happens every 41 years. That's what Judith said. 41 years, I replied, surprised. Who's Judith? Before I could answer, Richard called out. They'd found something in the water near the temple, clay coffins with bodies inside. The bodies were perfectly preserved, but something was wrong with them. Their skin looked intact, but when Dr. Hoffman carefully opened one, there were no organs inside, just empty space. I helped them document the find, trying not to show how scared I was. As Richard took pictures, I noticed something odd. In the photos he showed us on his camera screen, our faces looked slightly blurred, like something was interfering with the image. That evening, after setting up camp, Dr. Hoffman became obsessed with some inscriptions he'd found. He wouldn't eat dinner with us, just kept taking notes and muttering to himself. Is he always like this? I asked Dr. Patel. No, she said, watching him with concern. He's usually very methodical. This isn't like him at all. As night fell, Marcus set up recording equipment around the camp. To catch those sounds you mentioned, he explained. I warned everyone not to go near the water after dark and to wake me if they heard singing. They nodded, but I could tell most of them didn't take the warning seriously. I must have fallen asleep despite trying to stay awake. I dreamed of my brother again, standing by the temple, his skin too loose on his body. A scream woke me. I grabbed my flashlight and ran outside. Dr. Patel was pointing at the water's edge, where Marcus had been on watch. His flashlight lay on the ground, still on, pointing at a pile of neatly folded clothes. Marcus was gone. We searched all night, but found nothing. When the sun rose, I went back to my cabin to get more supplies and call for help. While I was on the radio with the station, I heard a knock at my door. It was Marcus. Hi, Ranger Washington, he said with a smile. Sorry for the scare. I went for a swim and lost track of time. Something wasn't right. His voice was flat and he didn't blink. Not once as he stood there, and when he stepped into my cabin, he left no wet footprints despite claiming he'd been swimming. I remembered Judith's warning and the copper in my pocket. Are you feeling okay? I asked, taking out my keys, which had a copper penny attached. Never better, he said, still smiling that empty smile. I pretended to drop my keys and brushed the penny against his hand as I picked them up. Nothing happened. But then I noticed something else. In the mirror behind him, there was no reflection where Marcus should have been. I need to get back to camp, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. As he turned to leave, I saw something move beneath the skin at the back of his neck, like something inside was adjusting its fit. I waited until he was gone, then called Judith. We're back, but he's not himself, I said. The copper didn't work. It's gotten stronger then, she said grimly. The skin taker has fed. What do I do? Don't let it know you suspect. I'll gather what we need. Be careful, Ellie. Watch the water. As I headed back to camp, I felt eyes on me from every part of the swamp. And in the distance, getting closer, I could hear that beautiful singing calling my name again. When I got back to camp, things were even stranger than before. Everyone was working, but something felt off about all of them. Dr. Hoffman had dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept at all. He snapped at anyone who came near his notes. Richard was taking photos of everyone when they weren't looking, and Dr. Patel kept staring at the water like she was waiting for something. I tried to act normal while keeping an eye on the fake Marcus. He moved weird, like he wasn't used to having arms and legs. Sometimes, when no one was watching, he would tilt his head all the way to one side like his neck was too flexible. "We're making amazing progress," Dr. Hoffman told me, his voice higher than usual. "We've found evidence of a civilization that worshipped a being that could live both in water and on land." "What kind of being?" I asked, pretending to be interested. "A god who could take any form," he said, his eyes too wide, too excited. "They made sacrifices to it during droughts. The chosen ones would give their skin as offerings, give their skin." I tried not to shudder. "Willingly. Can you imagine?" He laughed, but it sounded all wrong. "The texts say the god would wear these skins to walk among the people and choose who was worthy to join it underwater." I noticed his fingers had a slight webbing between them that hadn't been there yesterday. Later, I found Dr. Patel alone, measuring part of the temple. "I need to tell you something," I whispered. "I don't think Marcus is really Marcus." Instead of looking surprised, she nodded slowly. "I know. Richard isn't Richard either. I saw him last night, by the water." She swallowed hard. He was pulling at his face, stretching the skin like it was a mask. Her hands shook, "But I can't say anything. No one would believe me." "I believe you," I said. "We need to get out of here, all of us." "It's too late," she said, her voice breaking. "Something's happening to Dr. Hoffman, too. Last night I found him collecting samples of our skin while we slept. Bits of hair, fingernail clippings. He was putting them in the water like he was feeding something." Before we could say more, the fake Marcus called everyone to see a new discovery. They'd found an underwater cave beneath the temple, filled with what looked like sheets hanging. Underwater, the camera showed them swaying gently in the current. But they weren't sheets, they were skins, dozens of them, suspended like laundry on a line. I felt sick looking at them. Some were clearly ancient, preserved somehow by the water. Others looked fresher, newer. "We're going to dive down there tomorrow," Dr. Hoffman announced, looking at each of us with hungry eyes. That night, I pretended to go to sleep in my tent but stayed awake, watching. Around midnight, I heard that singing again. So beautiful it made my heart ache. I put in earplugs like Judith had told me to. Through a small hole in my tent, I watched as Dr. Hoffman, the fake Marcus, and the fake Richard all got up and walked towards the water in perfect unison, their movements exactly the same. They stood at the edge of the water, and then, one by one, they began to remove their faces. It was the most horrible thing I've ever seen. They just peeled the skin back like taking off a tight sweater. Underneath was something pale and glistening, with too many eyes and a mouth full of needle teeth. They placed the faces in the water, and I watched as something rose up to meet them, a larger version of what they were, but with dozens of limbs that moved in impossible ways. They stood there for a long time, not moving, like they were talking without words. When they came back, they were wearing their human faces again, but moving differently, more confident, more in sync with each other. I knew then that whatever was in the water was taking over all of them piece by piece. I waited until they returned to their tents, then snuck out of camp. I needed to get to Judith's house. We needed help. I had just reached my truck when I heard someone behind me, "Going somewhere, Ranger Washington." It was Dr. Patel. Her eyes were wide with fear. "They know," she whispered. "They know we suspect. We have to leave now." I started the truck and we sped away from camp. In the rearview mirror, I saw 3 figures standing at the edge of the camp, watching us go. They weren't chasing us. They didn't need to. At Judith's house, we found her gathering supplies, copper tools, strange-smelling herbs, and an old book with handwritten notes. "The skin taker is almost fully awake," she said when I told her what I'd seen. "Every 41 years, when the drought comes, it hunts. It needs 7 skins to sustain itself until the next cycle." "7?" Dr. Patel asked. "Why 7? 7 virtues," Judith said. "Intelligence, strength, beauty, youth, wisdom, courage, and sacrifice. It needs all of them to complete its cycle." "Tom, Bradley, the research team from the boat, Marcus, Richard," I counted. "That's 5 already. And Dr. Hoffman makes 6. Dr. Patel added quietly. We all looked at each other, the same thought in our minds. 1 more skin needed. 1 more victim. Judith showed us the book. It contained an old ritual that her ancestors had used to trap the skin taker underwater years ago. The ritual weakened it but didn't destroy it, she explained. Now it's free again and stronger than before. As we talked, the radio in my truck crackled to life with an emergency message. A hurricane was heading our way, due to hit in less than 72 hours. Evacuation orders were being issued for the coast. "A hurricane?" Dr. Patel looked confused. "But it's only June." "It's part of the cycle," Judith said grimly. "Drought, then flood. The temple will be underwater again soon. So we just need to wait it out," I asked. "Once the water rises, the skin taker goes back to sleep." Judith shook her head. "Not without the 7th skin, and not without the ritual to bind it. Otherwise it will be free to hunt beyond the swamp for the first time in centuries." I thought about all those people evacuating, roads clogged with cars, families trapped as the storm hit. Easy prey. "How do we stop it?" I asked. "We need to complete the ritual at the temple during the eye of the hurricane," Judith said. "When the waters begin to rise, but before the temple is fully submerged." "That's insane," Dr. Patel said. "We'd be killed in the storm." "We'll be killed anyway if we do nothing," I said. "I've seen what these things can do." As we made our plans, I caught a glimpse of myself in Judith's mirror. For a second, I thought I saw something move beneath my skin, like fingers pressing from inside. I touched my face, feeling for anything unusual. "The skin taker gets in your head," Judith said, watching me. "Makes you doubt yourself. That's how it hunts." Outside, the wind was picking up. The hurricane was coming faster than expected, and somewhere in the swamp, the skin taker was waiting for its final skin. The wind howled outside Judith's house as we gathered what we needed for the ritual. The hurricane was getting closer by the hour. The radio said it had grown stronger, now a Category 3 storm heading straight for us. "We need to complete the original ritual," Judith explained, laying out 7 items on her table. Each one represents an element needed to bind the skin taker. The items looked ordinary. A copper knife, a small bottle of fresh water, a piece of cypress wood carved with symbols, a bag of salt, a black stone, a bird feather, and a small vial of what Judith said was her own blood. "My ancestors tried this ritual before," she said, "but they were missing the 7th element, willing sacrifice." Dr. Patel and I looked at each other nervously. "What kind of sacrifice?" I asked. "Someone who offers themselves knowing what it means," Judith said. "The texts say the skin taker can only be truly bound by someone giving up what it wants most, skin freely given." That didn't sound good at all. But before we could ask more questions, I heard something outside. A car engine. I peeked through the curtains and felt my blood freeze. A park service truck was pulling up, and inside were Dr. Hoffman, Marcus, and Richard. All 3 had the same blank expression, the same unblinking stare. "They found us," I whispered. "We need to leave, now." We grabbed the ritual items and ran out the back door to my truck. As we drove away, I saw them enter Judith's house in my rear-view mirror. They moved together like they were all controlled by the same mind. How did they find us? Dr. Patel asked, her voice shaking. I looked down at my radio. They must have tracked the Park Service radio signal. I threw the radio out the window and kept driving, taking back roads toward the refuge. The sky was turning dark with storm. Clouds, even though it was only noon. Where can we go? Dr. Patel asked. They'll check your cabin next. I know a place, I said, turning onto a dirt road that led deeper into the swamp. An old hunting cabin. No one's used it in years. The cabin was small and dusty, but it would keep us hidden until we were ready. While Judith prepared the ritual items, Dr. Patel and I looked at a map of the refuge. The hurricane will hit tonight, I said, pointing to the weather radar on my phone. The eye should pass over us around midnight. That's our window to reach the temple. And how do we fight? These things? Dr. Patel asked. They look human now, but you saw what's underneath. I showed her what I'd brought from my cabin, my service pistol, a shotgun, and several boxes of ammunition. I wasn't sure they'd work against the skin taker, but they were better than nothing. Copper hurts them, Judith said, holding up some copper wire. We'll wrap this around some of the bullets. As we prepared, I found myself looking at Dr. Patel suspiciously. How did I know she wasn't one of them? How did she know I wasn't? Judith noticed the tension between us and brought out a small copper bell. Touch it, she said. Both of you. We did. Nothing happened. We were still human, for now. The skin taker makes you doubt, Judith reminded us. That's how it separates. It's prey. As evening approached, the wind grew stronger. Rain lashed against the windows of the cabin, and trees bent sideways in the storm. On the radio, emergency broadcasts warned everyone to evacuate or seek shelter immediately. We need to go soon, I said, checking my watch. If we wait too long, the roads will be flooded. Judith nodded and handed each of us a small pouch to wear around our necks. This will help you see the skin taker's true form, even when it's wearing someone else's skin. I opened mine and found a mixture of herbs, soil from the swamp, and what looked like a small piece of bone. What's this from? I asked, holding up the bone. Someone the skin taker took long ago, Judith said quietly. My grandmother's brother. As we loaded the truck, Judith pulled me aside. There's something I didn't tell the doctor, she whispered. About the sacrifice. I waited, feeling a knot form in my stomach. The one who performs the ritual. Who makes the sacrifice. She hesitated. They don't survive it, Ellie. I thought about all the people who would die if we failed. Not just in the refuge, but beyond. If the skin taker escaped the swamp, how many more would it take? I understand, I said. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and the wind was so strong it rocked the truck as we drove. Fallen trees and debris covered the road, making our progress slow. About a mile from the temple, we couldn't go any further. The road was completely flooded. We'll have to go on foot from here, I shouted over the storm. We got out, the wind nearly knocking us over. The water was already up to our ankles and rising fast. In the distance, lightning flashed, illuminating the temple. It stood like a dark shadow against the churning water, higher now than it had been before, as the ground around it flooded. As we struggled through the rising water, I heard something behind us, the sound of an airboat engine. They're coming, Dr. Patel shouted. Through the rain, I could see the airboat approaching, Dr. Hoffman at the controls, with Marcus and Richard beside him. But now they weren't bothering to act human. Their movements were jerky and wrong, their faces stretched into two wide smiles. Run, I yelled, pulling Judith and Dr. Patel toward the temple. We splashed through the deepening water, the temple still 100 yards away. The airboat was gaining on us. I turned and fired my shotgun, aiming for the engine. The shot hit something, and the airboat swerved wildly before continuing toward us. As we reached the edge of the temple grounds, the water was up to our waists. The stone structure rose up from the flood like an island. We need to get to the central chamber, Judith said, pointing to what looked like a doorway. That's where the ritual must be performed. Just as we reached the steps of the temple, I heard a splash behind us. The fake Dr. Hoffman had jumped from the airboat and was coming toward us, moving through the water with unnatural speed. "Go!" I shouted to Judith and Dr. Patel. "Get to the chamber, I'll hold them off." I raised my gun as the thing wearing Dr. Hoffman's face emerged from the water in front of me. It wasn't even trying to look human anymore. Its skin hung loose in places, and beneath it I could see something pale and glistening. "Hello, Ellie," it said. But the voice wasn't Dr. Hoffman's anymore. It was deeper, bubbling like it was speaking through water. "We've been waiting for you." Behind it, Marcus and Richard were approaching, their skin slipping off to reveal what was underneath. Creatures with too many eyes and limbs that bent the wrong way. The storm raged around us, but in that moment, all I could hear was the beautiful, terrible singing coming from deep beneath the temple. And somewhere in that song, I heard my brother's voice, calling my name. "We know why you're here," the thing wearing Dr. Hoffman's face said, moving closer. "You can't stop what's happening. The water is rising. We will be free." I fired my shotgun, hitting it square in the chest. It stumbled back, but didn't fall. Where the shot had hit, its skin was torn open, revealing something pale and writhing underneath. "Run!" I shouted again to Judith and Dr. Patel, who were still frozen behind me. This time they moved, splashing through the rising water toward the temple entrance. The creatures that used to be Marcus and Richard were spreading out, trying to circle around me. I fired again, then turned and ran after the others. Inside the temple it was surprisingly dry. The ancient stones kept out most of the rain, but water was starting to seep in through cracks in the floor. The beam of my flashlight showed carvings all over the walls, pictures of the skin taker taking people wearing their skins, dragging others underwater. "This way," Judith called, moving deeper into the temple. We followed her down a narrow hallway that led to a large circular room. In the center was a stone table, and behind it a deep pool of water that seemed to glow with a faint blue light. "The main chamber," Judith said. "This is where they made their offerings." Dr. Patel started setting up the ritual items on the table while I kept watch at the entrance. The storm was getting stronger. I could feel the whole temple shaking with each thunderclap. "Hurry," I said. "They're coming." Judith began the ritual, placing each item in a specific pattern on the stone table. She spoke words in a language I didn't understand, her voice growing stronger with each phrase. The water in the pool began to bubble and churn. "It's working," Dr. Patel whispered. Then I heard something splash in the hallway behind us. They were inside the temple now. "Keep going," I told Judith. "Don't stop no matter what happens." I aimed my gun at the hallway entrance, waiting. The splashing got louder, and then the thing that used to be Dr. Hoffman appeared, its shape changing as it moved. It was taller now, its arms too long, its face melting and reforming. "The seventh skin," it gurgled. "We need the seventh skin." I fired, but it dodged with impossible speed. Behind it, the fake Marcus and Richard appeared, their bodies twisted into new shapes. Dr. Patel grabbed a copper knife from the table and rushed forward to help me. She slashed at the Marcus thing, and where the copper touched, its skin sizzled and peeled back. The Dr. Hoffman thing lunged at me, knocking the gun from my hands. Its fingers were webbed now, with sharp claws that tore at my jacket. I fell backward, struggling to keep its snapping teeth away from my face. "The ritual needs the seventh element," Judith shouted over the storm. "The willing sacrifice." I kicked the creature off me and scrambled back toward the stone table. Dr. Patel was fighting the other two, slashing with the copper knife, but they were backing her into a corner. The temple shook violently, and part of the ceiling collapsed, letting in the full fury of the storm. Rain lashed down, and I could see the hurricane's eye beginning to form above us through the broken roof. The water in the chamber was rising fast, already up to our knees. Judith had finished placing the 6 ritual items. All that remained was the 7th, the sacrifice. "It has to be now, Ellie," she said. her eyes meeting mine. The eye of the storm is passing over us. Before I could respond, the pool behind the stone table erupted. Something massive rose from the water, the true form of the skin taker. It was enormous, with dozens of limbs and a body that seemed to be made of transparent flesh. Inside, I could see organs and bones that weren't human. Its face was the worst part. 100 eyes of different colors, taken from its victims, all blinking at different times. And around its body hung skins, some ancient and preserved, others fresh. With horror, I recognized one of them, the weather-beaten face of Tom Bradley. The 3 smaller creatures stopped attacking and bowed their heads as the skin taker rose higher. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I reached for my mother's cypress pendant, the one she said would protect me from swamp spirits, and pulled it from my neck. "Judith," I said, handing it to her, "it's the 7th element. My mother carved it from the same cypress tree where my brother drowned. It's been soaked in my family's tears. Will it work?" Judith looked at it, then at me, understanding in her eyes. "Yes, but there still needs to be a sacrifice." The skin taker was fully out of the water now, its limbs reaching for us. The smaller creatures moved aside, letting their master approach. Judith placed my pendant on the stone table with the other items and began the final words of the ritual. The items began to glow with a blue light, the same color as the bioluminescence I'd seen in the swamp. "What sacrifice?" Dr. Patel shouted, still holding the copper knife in front of her. "What does it need?" The skin taker let out a horrible sound, part scream, part song, and lunged toward the table, trying to stop the ritual. Without thinking, I threw myself between the creature and the table. Its limbs wrapped around me, cold and slippery. I could feel it trying to get under my skin, to take me like it had taken the others. "Ellie, no!" Dr. Patel screamed, but Judith kept chanting, her voice rising above the storm. The blue light grew brighter, enveloping the table, the ritual items, and then spreading outward. The skin taker screamed again, its grip on me tightening. I could feel my skin burning where it touched me, like it was trying to peel away from my body. Then I heard another voice, a child's voice, cutting through the chaos. "Ellie." Somehow in the mass of twisted limbs and stolen faces that made up the skin taker, I saw him. My brother Michael, his face preserved exactly as it had been the day he drowned. His skin was part of the creature now, had been for all these years. "Michael," I whispered. "Let go, Ellie," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "You couldn't save me then, but you can now." I understood then. This was the real sacrifice, not my life, but my guilt. I had carried it for so long, blamed myself for his death. The skin taker had fed on that guilt, used it to call to me. "I am sorry," I told Michael's face. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." "I know," he said, and his face seemed to smile. "Now, save everyone else." I reached out and touched his face one last time. As I did, the blue light from the ritual swept over us both. The skin taker let out a final, terrible scream. Its body began to twist and contort, the stolen skins peeling away. I saw faces from every age, ancient ones, modern ones, all its victims. Through the centuries, separating from its true form. The light grew so bright I had to close my eyes. I felt the creature's grip loosen, then release me completely. I fell into the rising water, gasping for breath. When I opened my eyes again, the skin taker was gone. In its place was a whirlpool of glowing blue water swirling down into the depths of the pool. The smaller creatures were being pulled in too, their borrowed forms dissolving as they went. "The ritual worked," Judith said, helping me to my feet. "The sacrifice was accepted. The temple was coming apart around us, stones falling. As the hurricane's full force returned, the eye had passed. We need to get out now," Dr. Patel shouted, already heading for the exit. We fought our way back through the temple as it collapsed behind us. Outside, the storm was at its worst, the wind so strong it almost knocked us off our feet. But the airboat was still there, its engine somehow still running. We climbed aboard, and I steered us away from the sinking temple. Behind us, the entire structure was disappearing beneath the rising floodwaters, taking the skin taker with it. As we sped through the storm toward higher ground, I looked back one last time. For just a moment, I thought I saw a small figure standing on the last visible part of the temple. A boy, raising his hand in farewell before the waters closed over everything. Then there was nothing but the storm, the rain, and the long path. Home. I don't remember much about the rest of that night. The storm was too loud, the wind too strong. Somehow we made it to higher ground, the airboat struggling against the hurricane winds. We found shelter in an old ranger station and waited out the worst of the storm. When morning came, the hurricane had passed, leaving destruction in its wake. Trees down everywhere, buildings damaged, the swamp overflowing its banks. But the sun was shining again like nothing had happened. The rescue teams found us that afternoon. We were all in bad shape. Cuts, bruises, and what the doctors later called exposure and shock. They took us to the hospital in town, where I spent 3 days drifting in and out of sleep, haunted by dreams of water and singing, when I was finally well enough to answer questions. The police and Park Service officials had plenty. What happened to Dr. Hoffman and the others? What were we doing at the temple during a hurricane? Why did we ignore evacuation orders? I told them as much of the truth as I thought they'd believe, that we'd discovered an ancient structure, that Dr. Hoffman had become obsessed with it, that Marcus and Richard had gone missing, that we'd tried to secure the site before the storm hit, but the temple had collapsed, probably burying the missing researchers. They didn't believe even that much. Not really. The storm had washed away most of the evidence. The temple was gone, buried under 15 feet of swamp water. The bodies were never found. Dr. Patel backed up my story at first, but I could see the doubt growing in her eyes as the days passed. By the time she returned to the university a week later, she was already talking about shared delusions and storm-induced hallucinations. Only Judith and I remembered the truth, and we agreed some truths are better left unspoken. My official report mentioned only the temple discovery and its subsequent destruction by the hurricane. I included my sketches of the structure and notes about the carvings, but nothing about the skin taker or what lived beneath the water. The photographs Richard had taken all turned out blank. The water samples I'd collected had mysteriously evaporated from their sealed containers. The skin sample I'd found had decomposed into unidentifiable organic matter. Without evidence, the whole incident was labeled a tragedy caused by poor judgment during a natural disaster. 3 researchers lost, presumed dead. Case closed. I took a leave of absence from the Ranger Service after that. Spent some time with my parents, trying to find the words to tell them about Michael. In the end, I couldn't. Some wounds are too deep to reopen even for the truth. 6 months later, I returned to work. The swamp looked normal again. Water levels back to their usual height. Wildlife returned to their territories. To most people, everything was back to normal. But I noticed things now that I hadn't before. The way some people's reflections seemed slightly delayed in mirrors. How certain folks around town never seemed to blink quite enough. The way some animals would go silent when particular people walked by. I started keeping a journal, noting these observations. At first, I thought it was just paranoia, my mind playing tricks after what I'd been through. Then I saw the new ranger who'd been hired during my absence. Ranger Collins was well-liked, efficient, friendly, but when he thought no one was watching, his movements changed, became too fluid, too perfect. And once, just once, I saw him standing by the water at sunset, his face reflected in the surface, except the reflection wasn't looking back at him. It was looking at me. I went to Judith that night. She wasn't surprised. "You didn't think it was over, did you?" she asked, brewing tea in her small kitchen. The ritual contained it, weakened it, but the skin taker is ancient, Ellie. It knows how to wait. For 41 years, I asked. Until the next drought, she handed me a copper knife, similar to the one Dr. Patel had used. Keep this with you, she said, and keep watching. There are others like us in other places, people who know, who remember. We need to find them. I took the knife and added it to my ranger equipment. Then I started researching. Newspaper articles about missing persons near bodies of water, reports of strange behavior following floods or droughts, ancient legends from coastal communities around the world. A pattern emerged. Every 41 years, always the same cycle. Drought reveals, flood conceals, and in between people go missing, people change. I've been keeping track for 3 years now, building a network of people who've seen things they can't explain, people who've lost loved ones to still waters, people who know there's something out there wearing human faces. Sometimes at night, I still hear the singing, beautiful and terrible, calling my name. On those nights, I hold my mother's pendant tight and remember what I saw beneath the swamp, and I watch the water, waiting for the day when it falls again, revealing what hides beneath the surface. Next time, we'll be ready. Because the thing about water is this: it's patient. It can wear down mountains given enough time. It can seep through the smallest cracks. It can wait, and so can I. My name is Dan Nakamura, and I've been a park ranger here in Olympic National Park for almost 15 years. The forest has always been a part of me, even before I put on this uniform. This morning started like many others, a dawn patrol through the misty old-growth forest. The trees here are giants, some reaching over 200 feet tall. Their trunks are wider than my truck, and their roots spread out like sleeping monsters under the ground. But something wasn't right today. I was documenting a strange pattern of lightning strikes from last night's storm. 27 hits in a perfect circle, each one striking an ancient tree. I've never seen lightning behave like that in all my years here. As I walked through the grove, I noticed something else strange. New growth, bright green shoots and leaves, were sprouting everywhere. That wouldn't be unusual in spring, but these ancient trees don't usually sprout so quickly. Some of this growth looked like it happened overnight. Then I found it, a patch of soil darker and richer than anywhere else in the forest. According to my records, nothing has grown in this spot for decades, not a single fern or mushroom. But today it was teeming with life. The heavy rains had washed away some of the topsoil, revealing root systems unlike anything I'd seen before. They formed perfect geometric patterns, almost like they were placed deliberately. It made my skin crawl. The morning light filtering through the canopy created weird shadows on the forest floor. They seemed to shift and move even when the branches above were still. More than once, I thought I saw a human shape in those shadows, only to find nothing when I looked directly at it. I've spent my life in these woods. I know what belongs and what doesn't. The squirrels and foxes that usually chatter and rustle through the underbrush were nowhere to be seen. But ravens were everywhere, more than I'd ever counted before, watching from the branches. And the mushrooms. They sprouted in clusters so dense they looked like cities. The moss caught my eye next. Normally it grows in patches on the north side of trees, but here it was growing straight up the trunks in long strips, forming shapes that looked disturbingly like arms and legs and faces. Despite the dense shade, it was warm in the grove, much warmer than it should be. I checked my thermometer, 10 degrees higher than the surrounding forest. That's when I felt it, the feeling of being watched. Not from one direction, but from everywhere at once. Every tree, every shadow, every patch of moss seemed to be looking at me. I've tracked animals and men through impossible terrain, I know when I'm being hunted, but this was different. This was like the forest itself had woken up and noticed me standing in its palm. I don't talk much about my past. Most people around here just know me as Ranger Dan, the quiet guy who knows every trail and tree in the park. But standing there in that strange grove, memories came flooding back. I was just a kid when they took us away. 1942. My family had lived in these forests for 3 generations, but none of that mattered after Pearl Harbor. One day we were Americans, the next we were the enemy. They sent us to Tule Lake, a fancy name for a prison camp in California. I was 7 years old. When I got older, I joined the army. Figured if I fought for America, maybe America would finally see me as one of its own. They made me a tracker in Korea. I could find paths where others saw only wilderness. Something in me just knew which way to go, like I had a compass in my bones. I pulled my grandfather's actual compass from my pocket. He'd made it himself, carved from wood with a brass needle. On the back, he'd etched Japanese characters that meant find, true north within. I've carried it every day since he died. After Korea, I came back to the forest, where my family had been guides and woodsmen. It felt right, like coming home. I met my wife here, had a son. Then cancer took her 3 years ago. After that, I threw myself into the most remote ranger posts I could find. The trees don't ask why your eyes are red in the morning, my son, and I don't talk much nowadays. David thinks I'm stuck in the past, too connected to these woods and old ways. He moved to Seattle, works with computers, says the future is digital, not in dirt and trees. Maybe he's right. What he doesn't understand is how these forests are in my blood. I can identify every plant, read weather changes in how the moss grows, find north without a compass. The other rangers joke that I'm part tree myself, my friend. Robert Hayes understands. He's a botanist from the university who studies these old-growth ecosystems. We spend hours talking about how these ancient trees communicate through their roots, how a forest is really one giant living thing. As I stood there in that strange grove, another memory surfaced, one I usually keep buried. During the Korean War, I got separated from my unit in a dense forest. 6 days alone. When they found me, I was healthy, well-fed, with no memory of how I'd survived. Just flashes of dreams about trees moving in the moonlight, roots bringing water to my lips. I shook my head to clear it. Focus on the present, Dan. Something's not right in this grove, and I need to figure out what. I tucked my compass away and pulled out my notebook. Whatever was happening here needed to be documented. Little did I know I was about to find the first real evidence that my unease wasn't just imagination. I was taking notes when I spotted something bright red against the dark green of the forest. A backpack, the kind hikers use, but it wasn't on the ground. Somehow it was stuck halfway inside a tree trunk, about 20 feet up, not caught on branches or tossed there. It was like the tree had grown around it. I climbed up to check it. Out. The backpack was practically part of the tree now, with bark growing over the straps. But when I unzipped it, everything inside was perfectly fine. A water bottle, trail mix, a map, even a wallet with ID. Sarah Michaels, 27, from Portland. She'd been reported missing 3 weeks ago. Back in my truck, I looked through the photos I'd taken of the lightning strikes. When I developed them later that day, each picture of the grove showed strange streaks of light that hadn't been visible to my naked eye. Just in the photos of that specific area, nowhere else. The next morning, I returned with proper climbing gear to retrieve the backpack. That's when I noticed my compass wasn't working. The needle just spun in circles or sometimes pointed directly toward the center of the grove, no matter which way I turned. As I was examining the trees struck by lightning, I noticed they were leaking a strange substance. Not just regular sap. This was thicker, amber-colored, but with a reddish tint. It felt warm to the touch, almost like blood mixed with tree resin. Then I found the fox. At first, I thought it was dead, somehow shoved into a hollow in a tree trunk. But when I got closer, I saw its chest moving. It was alive, breathing, eyes alert and watching me. But the tree had somehow grown around its back legs. When I tried to free it, the bark seemed to tighten. The fox didn't make a sound, just watched, me with knowing eyes. I marked the spot and decided to bring Dr. Hayes to see it. This was beyond my understanding. That's when the strangest thing happened. I checked my watch as I entered the grove. It was 9:12 a.m. I remember specifically because I had a meeting with the head ranger at 2 Mile. I walked toward the center of the grove, making notes. The next thing I knew, the forest was bathed in orange light. Sunset. My watch read 6:47 p.m. Nearly 10 hours had passed and I had no memory of it. My notebook had no new entries. My water bottle was full. It was as if I'd just blinked and lost an entire day. Disoriented, I pulled out an old survey map of the grove and compared it to my current GPS readings. The trees weren't where they should be. Not by a little, by dozens of yards in some cases, as if they had moved. That night in my cabin, I called Dr. Hayes. "Bob, I need you to run some tests on a sample I collected," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's something in the old grove that doesn't make sense." "What kind of sample?" he asked. "I'm not sure how to describe it," I said honestly. "It's from a tree, but it's not just sap." 3 days later, Hayes called back, his voice tense. "Dan, this sample, it's not possible. The cellular structure shows plant cells, yes, but intermixed with what appears to be animal tissue. I've never seen anything like it. Where exactly? Did you find this?" Before I could answer, the radio on my desk crackled to life. "Ranger Nakamura, come in." It was dispatch. "We've got another missing persons report. 3rd hiking group in the same area this month. Search and rescue is mobilizing. They need your expertise on the terrain." I looked at my map, already knowing which trail they'd been on, the one that passed right through that ancient grove. "I'll head out now," I responded, a knot forming in my stomach. Something told me we wouldn't find them, not in any way we'd recognize. The Forest Service took the disappearances seriously after the 3rd group went missing. They sent in a special team to investigate. I met them at the ranger station on a foggy Monday morning. Thomas Reynolds was in charge. Tall by the book with a skeptical frown that said he didn't believe in anything he couldn't touch. Karen Wilcox was their biologist, quiet and methodical, with quick eyes that noticed everything. Frank Martinez handled search and rescue operations, built like a tree himself with 20 years of experience finding lost hikers. Lisa Chen was the geological surveyor, young but smart, with equipment I'd never seen before. "Ranger Nakamura," Thomas said, not offering his hand. "We'll need you to guide us to the exact locations of the disappearances." I nodded. "Most of them center around the old growth grove about 3 miles in. But I should warn you, we'll form our own conclusions." Thomas cut me off. "We're setting up a research camp at the perimeter of the area." By noon, they had a small village of tents and equipment surrounding the grove. I watched Lisa set up her ground-penetrating radar while Karen collected plant samples. "These leaves show unusual cellular activity," Karen said that evening, looking up from her portable microscope. "They contain compounds I've never seen before, almost like they're designed to affect brain chemistry in mammals." Thomas rolled his eyes. "Let's stick to facts, not science fiction. Martinez, what did you find?" Frank spread out a map on the table. "I've marked all disappearances in this region going back 50 years. He pointed to the clusters of red pins. "They occur in cycles about every 7 to 10 years. And look!" He placed another map on top, showing lightning strike patterns. The strikes match the disappearance cycles. "Coincidence," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. Lisa joined us, her face pale. "You all need to see this." She turned her laptop around, showing a 3D model from her radar. There's a root system under the grove, unlike anything I've ever seen. All the trees are connected to a central point, like a network. That's not uncommon in old-growth forests, I said. Trees communicate through their roots. Not like this, Lisa insisted. These roots go down over 100 feet, and they're moving. The equipment malfunction, Thomas said, but he was looking troubled. That night, our troubles really began. Every battery in camp drained completely. Cameras recorded only static and what sounded like whispers. And Karen, we found her sleepwalking toward the center of the grove at 2 a.m., murmuring about joining them. Frank had to physically carry her back as she fought him. The next morning, Lisa showed me something she'd found in old records. A logging company had tried to cut the grove in 1902. Their journal described workers being consumed by the trees, drawn into the wood while still screaming. The company abandoned the site and never returned. I was examining the oldest tree. In the grove, when I spotted it, Japanese characters carved into the bark, nearly grown over with age. The same characters from my grandfather's journal, the forest that consumes. What does it mean? Lisa asked, seeing my face go pale. My grandfather wrote about this place, I said slowly. He called it a hungry forest. I thought it was just an old story to keep children from wandering too far. That night, Thomas took the first watch. By morning, he was gone. We searched for hours before Frank spotted him near the center of the grove. Thomas was on his knees, conscious but unable to move. Thin roots had broken through the soil and pierced his legs and back, connecting him to the ground. His eyes were clear, terrified. "Get them out," he whispered. "They're in my head. I can hear them. So many voices." Frank reached for his knife to cut the roots, but Karen grabbed his wrist. "Don't," she said, her voice strange and flat. "You'll kill him. They're part of him now." That's when Dr. Hayes arrived at our camp, out of breath and excited. He'd been analyzing the samples I sent him and came as soon as he could. "Dan," he said, his eyes wide with wonder and fear. "I think we're dealing with something science has never documented before. A forest with a unified consciousness, and it's waking up." None of us slept that night. We took turns watching Thomas, whose condition was getting worse by the hour. More roots had emerged, thinner than hair, working their way through his body. And the strangest part, he was still talking, still himself, but his thoughts were becoming alien. "They've been here so long," he whispered. "They remember the ice, they remember the first men. They're so patient, so hungry for new memories." I caught Karen staring at the trees with longing in her eyes. When I asked what she was thinking, she smiled strangely. "Can you imagine it, Dan? Being part of something so ancient, never dying, just growing together." Around midnight, we all jumped at a sound from the forest, a slow wooden creak like branches bending. But there was no wind. The trees were moving on their own. We first saw it at twilight the next day. I was checking the perimeter when movement caught my eye, not wind in the branches or an animal. This was different. The roots near the base of a massive cedar tree were rising from the ground, twisting together like fingers, weaving into a fist. They formed a shape about my height, a rough outline of a person with a trunk-like body and limbs made of smaller, tendril-like roots. It had no face, just a smooth knot of bark where a head should be. I froze, unable to move or even breathe. The thing stood motionless for maybe 10 seconds, then melted back into the ground so quickly I almost doubted what I'd seen. When I told the others, Thomas laughed weakly through his pain. The roots had spread up to his chest now. "I see them all the time now," he whispered. "When you're not looking, they're curious about us." Karen spent hours studying the patterns the moving branches made. "They're trying to communicate," she insisted, pointing to her notebook where she'd drawn repeating shapes. "It's a language." Frank thought we were all going crazy until he checked the camera footage that night. The cameras showed what my eyes had seen, root systems rising into humanoid shapes, moving between trees, sometimes splitting into smaller versions of themselves. But when we looked at the same spots in person, we saw only shadows and normal forest floor. It's like they exist just outside what we can perceive, Lisa said, but the cameras catch them. The next morning, Dr. Hayes came back with more equipment. His face was gaunt, and I noticed he winced when he moved. Cancer, he admitted. When I asked if he was okay, terminal, 6 months, maybe less. He looked at the trees with a strange expression. That's why I'm so interested in what's happening here, Dan. These trees, they preserve things. He showed us slides of cells from the samples I'd collected. These are human cells, perfectly preserved inside tree tissue. Some of them are over 100 years old, but they're still alive, still thinking. That night, Karen woke up screaming. She said she'd breathed in some spores while collecting samples, and now she could feel the entity moving, could sense its intentions. It's ancient, she gasped, older than the trees themselves. It's been sleeping, dormant, but our presence is waking it up. The logging, the visitors, the development, it feels threatened. What does it want? Lisa asked. Karen's eyes were wide. To grow, to preserve, to absorb. Thomas's condition worsened by the hour. The roots had spread throughout his body now. His skin had taken on a greenish-brown tint, and small leaf buds were forming along his arms, but his mind was still there, though changing. I understand more now, he told us, his voice rough, like bark scraping together. It doesn't hate us. It wants to save us, make us eternal. That afternoon, I found my grandfather's old journal in my pack. Something had drawn me to bring it along. Inside were detailed accounts of rituals his father and grandfather had performed at the grove. Offerings, prayers, specific arrangements of stones and wood. The old ones knew, I told Hayes. My ancestors and other native tribes. They performed ceremonies to keep the forest consciousness dormant. But after the internment camps, after my family was forced away, I looked up at the towering trees. No one was left to remember. We all jumped at a sharp crack from the forest. A cedar tree near the edge of our camp was splitting open, right down the middle. Inside the opening trunk we caught a glimpse of something impossible, a human form preserved in the wood grain like a fossil, eyes open and aware. Frank dropped his coffee mug, shattering it on the ground. We need to burn this place, he whispered, all of it. But Karen stepped in front of him, her expression fierce. You don't understand what's happening here. This entity, it's not evil. It's the oldest living thing on this peninsula. Maybe, in the country. It's trying to survive the only way it knows how. As the sun set, casting long shadows through the trees, I couldn't shake a memory that had been trying to surface for days. That time in Korea, lost in the forest for 6 days. I remembered now, the trees had moved then too. They had fed me, sheltered me, guided me back toward my unit. But unlike this grove, that forest had let me go. It recognized you, Hayes said, when I told him. As a descendant of its caretakers, it knew your bloodline. As darkness fell completely, we huddled around our lanterns. Thomas was quiet now, his transformation accelerating. Lisa showed us her hands, where patches of her skin had developed a bark-like texture after she'd fallen and touched the soil directly. And outside our camp, just beyond the light, we could hear them moving now. The wooden figures, gathering among the trees, watching us with eyes we couldn't see. None of us slept much anymore. When we did, we shared the same dream, being rooted in the forest floor, feeling the slow pulse of sap through our veins, watching seasons pass in the blink of an eye, winter, spring, summer, fall, decades flowing like water, centuries. I'd wake up gasping, dirt clutched in my fists. The others were no better off. Frank paced the camp at night, his flashlight beam jerking nervously between the trees. During the day, he made phone calls, trying to get permission to bring in heavy equipment. The only solution is to cut it all. Down, he told me, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Burn the stumps, salt the earth. You can't do that, I said. This is protected land, old-growth forest. Some of these trees are 1,000 years old. His eyes were wild. And how old? Is that thing living inside them? The thing eating Thomas alive? Thomas hardly spoke anymore. The roots had spread throughout his body. His arms had elongated, fingers splitting into twig-like extensions. His skin had hardened into bark, and small leaves sprouted from his shoulders. But his eyes were still human, watching us from inside a body that no longer was. Lisa showed me her arms on the 5th day. The bark-like patches had spread up from her hands to her elbows. It happened after I fell, she whispered. The soil got into a cut on my palm. I can feel it spreading, Dan. At night I can hear whispering, not in my ears, inside my head. Karen was the most disturbing change. She'd stopped trying to leave the grove entirely. She spent her days wandering among the trees, touching them, speaking to them in low tones. When she returned to camp, she spoke of the entity like it was a god. It's offering us immortality, she told me, her eyes feverish. Don't you understand? We could join with it, become part of something that will live for thousands of years. No more pain, no more loneliness, just togetherness. Dr. Hayes watched her with understanding. The pain of his cancer was getting worse, and I caught him looking at the trees with longing. Maybe she's right, he said to me one evening. I'm dying anyway, Dan. Months of pain, hospitals, machines, or I could be part of something eternal. I found myself remembering more about those 6 days in Korea. The forest there had been different, younger, less powerful. It had touched my mind but not changed it. This grove was stronger, hungrier. Walking through the grove with Hayes, we discovered the truth about the missing hikers. They were still here, all of them. We found them embedded in trees throughout the forest in various stages of transformation. Some were recent, still mostly human, but with roots growing through their limbs. Others were ancient, barely recognizable as human at all, just faces pressed against the inner bark of massive trees. All of them conscious, all of them watching. My God, Hayes whispered, some of these are hundreds of years old. I remembered the logging company records from 1902. How many others had the forest taken over the centuries? Back at camp, Lisa had completed her mapping of the grove. Her hands shook as she showed us the results. The grove is expanding, she said. It's grown 17 feet in all directions since we started measuring 5 days ago. At this rate, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The forest was waking up, growing, hungry. And directly in its path lay the main tourist areas of the park, then small towns beyond. That evening, I found a hidden compartment in my grandfather's compass. Inside was a folded paper with Japanese characters I couldn't read and a map of the grove with 7 points marked in a circle. As I studied it, Karen looked over my shoulder, her eyes suddenly sharp. I can read that now, she said, pointing to the Japanese characters. It says 7 anchors to bind the walker. How can you read Japanese? I asked, moving away from her slightly. She smiled, and I noticed fine root-like lines spreading from her pupils. I can't, but it can. That night we were awakened by Frank shouting. He stood at the edge of camp, his flashlight illuminating the forest edge. The trees were visibly closer than they had been the day before. Roots snaked along the ground toward our tents. The grove was coming for us. The next morning, my hands trembled as I carefully unfolded my grandfather's journal. Pages yellowed with age revealed secrets my family had kept for generations. Every 60 years, I read aloud to the others, when the autumn star aligns with the mountain peak, the grove walker awakens. I turned the brittle page. My father taught me, as his father taught him, how to speak to the Ancient One, how to offer the 7 anchors that will return it to its sleep. Hayes leaned in closer, wincing with pain. 7 anchors. What does that mean? I kept reading, translating the mix of Japanese and English as best I could. The Grove Walker is not evil. It is the memory keeper of the forest. It preserves all. It touches, holding their knowledge for eternity. Lisa looked up from her maps. That's why it's absorbing people, to preserve them. I nodded slowly. According to my grandfather, the entity doesn't understand that what it's doing hurts us. It's trying to save us in its way, but it needs willing anchors to complete its cycle and return to dormancy. Willing sacrifices, you mean? Frank spat, pacing the edge of our camp. He'd strung up ropes with cans attached as an alarm system, like we were in a war zone. Thomas made a rough sound from where he sat, now more tree than human. Karen went to him, placing her hand on his bark-like shoulder. "He wants to speak," she said. Her role as translator had become more pronounced as Thomas lost the ability to talk normally. Thomas's wooden lips barely moved, but Karen nodded as if hearing him clearly. "He says the entity is ancient, from a time before humans walked these lands," she relayed. "It evolved to preserve the forest's knowledge through long ice ages and fires. When humans arrived, it discovered our minds were delicious to it, rich with memories and emotions it had never experienced. So it started collecting people," Hayes said, "like pressing flowers in a book." Karen nodded. "But it doesn't want to spread endlessly. It just needs enough anchors to satisfy its hunger. Then it can sleep again." 7, I said, looking back at my grandfather's map. "It needs 7 willing sacrifices to bind it for another 60 years. Frank laughed bitterly. "And who's going to volunteer for that?" Hayes raised his hand. "I will," he said quietly. We all stared at him. "I'm dying anyway. Painful, ugly death from cancer, or becoming part of something eternal." He looked around at the ancient trees. "Besides, think what we could learn. I could observe from the inside, maybe find a way to communicate." I realized he'd been considering this for days. Lisa had been studying the soil samples from different parts of the grove. "The entity sits at an intersection of what the indigenous people called ley lines," she explained, showing us her geological survey. "Unusual electromagnetic patterns that might explain the energy we're seeing." Karen had wandered to the edge of camp again, her head tilted as if listening to something we couldn't hear. When she returned, her eyes were wide with excitement. "It's trying to speak directly to us," she said. "It wants Dan. It recognizes him, his bloodline. His grandfather was the last keeper, the one who knew how to communicate with it." "My grandfather?" I said, surprised. "But he never told me." "Some knowledge is passed only when needed," Karen said, but it wasn't her voice anymore. It was deeper, slower, like wood creaking in wind. "He expected to return after the war, but men with guns took him away." A chill ran down my spine. The entity was speaking through her now. "The hunger woke us," Karen continued in that strange voice. "Forest dying, cousins cut down, no keeper to sing the sleeping songs." She blinked, and for a moment her eyes appeared to be made of swirling wooden patterns. "We need willing guardians, 7 to anchor us, 7 to join the root mind." "And if we refuse?" Frank demanded. Karen's face twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then we keep growing, keep seeking, keep taking until hunger sleeps." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about my lost grandfather, who'd carried the knowledge of how to communicate with the entity. How different might things be if our family hadn't been torn from this land during the war? Lisa found me sitting by the fire. "I discovered something in the old tribal records," she said quietly. "The 7 anchors aren't just random sacrifices. They're specific roles. The keeper, the wise one, the warrior, the healer, the builder, the seer, and the innocent." She looked at me meaningfully. 7 aspects of humanity the entity needs to understand before it can rest. I looked around our small group, a park ranger descended from traditional keepers, a dying scientist, a hardened search and rescue expert, a geologist, a biologist who could now communicate with the entity. It chose us, I realized. It's been drawing us here all along. Morning came with heavy fog clinging to the trees. We gathered around the small camp stove, clutching coffee mugs with tired hands. We have two choices, I said, looking at each face in turn. Try to destroy the entity or re-establish the pact my ancestors made with it. Frank's jaw tightened. You know where I stand? This thing is dangerous. So is a forest fire, Hayes countered, or a chainsaw in the wrong hands. But we don't destroy an entire ecosystem because it's dangerous. I spread out my grandfather's map on the folding table. The ritual requires 7 anchor points around the grove, each with a specific offering, and 7 people to become permanent. In parts of the grove, Lisa added quietly. The weight of that hung in the air between us. Karen, who'd been silent all morning, suddenly spoke. I've been working on something. She pulled out a notebook filled with strange symbols. Using what the entity has shown me, I think we can communicate with it more directly. She explained her system. Combinations of light patterns using our flashlights, sounds made by striking specific trees, and a paste she'd made from grove. Plants that, when burned, released a chemical signal the entity could understand. Hayes volunteered to test the communication method. I'm already committed to being the first anchor, he said. His face was grey with pain, but his eyes were clear. The wise one, according to the ritual. Thomas, barely able to move now, made a rasping sound. He says he'll be the second, Karen translated. The warrior. He's fought it as long as he could. Now he'll fight for it. I felt a responsibility settling on my shoulders, heavier than any backpack I'd ever carried. I'll be the keeper, I said, like my grandfather before me. We spent the day preparing. Lisa created a detailed map showing the entity's route network, marking vulnerable points in case our negotiations failed. If we need to stop it from spreading, copper barriers driven deep into the ground here, and here would sever the main connections, she explained. Karen worked with Hayes to refine the communication signals. By noon, they could reliably get simple responses from the entity, movements of branches or roots that answered yes/no questions. I studied my grandfather's ritual instructions, gathering the items needed, specific stones, wood carvings, and plants placed at each anchor point around the grove. The pattern created a boundary the entity couldn't cross, if properly maintained. Frank watched all this with growing unease. Several times I caught him on his satellite phone, speaking in hushed tones. I tried to include him in our plans, but he kept his distance. Frank, I finally said, we need you for this to work. According to the ritual, you'd be the builder. He stared at me for a long moment. I'm building something all right, he said cryptically. An insurance policy. He walked away before I could ask what he meant. As evening approached, we gathered for a final meal before beginning the ritual at midnight. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lisa showed signs of spreading transformation. The bark-like patches had reached her shoulders, and small rootlets occasionally emerged from her fingertips, then retreated. I'll be the 4th anchor, she said, voice steady despite her fear. The one who understands Earth. Karen had stopped pretending to be fully human. Thin vines grew through her hair like living braids, and her eyes had taken on the swirling pattern of wood grain. I'm the seer now, she said simply. The one who sees both worlds. We still needed 2 more anchors, the healer and the innocent. I worried we wouldn't complete the ritual in time. Hayes suddenly doubled over in pain, coughing up dark fluid specked with what looked like pine needles. It's time, he gasped. I can't wait until midnight. We helped him to the center of the grove, to a clearing where the soil was darkest. Karen burned her plant mixture, releasing sweet-smelling smoke, and used our signal system to tell the entity we were ready to begin. The ground trembled slightly. Roots emerged, twisting upward into a chair-like shape. Hayes sat in it without hesitation, closing his eyes as the roots began to slowly wrap around his legs. "It doesn't hurt," he said, sounding surprised. "It feels like coming home." We watched in silent awe as Hayes's transformation began, much faster than Thomas's had been. The roots moved through his body like water soaking into paper. Within minutes, his skin took on the texture of young bark, but his eyes remained clear, alert. "I can feel it," he whispered. "The entity. It's so vast, so old. It's—" He stopped, eyes widening. "Others. I can feel the others who came before, hundreds of them, their memories preserved." As darkness fell completely, Hayes was almost fully absorbed, becoming part of a new tree growing unnaturally fast at the grove's center. Thomas was brought next, his already transformed body merging easily with the waiting roots. I set the first boundary marker, a stone carved with my family's symbol, at the southernmost point of the circle. The entity responded immediately. The trees within the circle seemed to relax, their threatening posture easing. As I returned to camp to get the second marker, I heard engines in the distance. Frank was gone. "He's betrayed us," Karen said, her voice like rustling leaves. "He's brought people to destroy the grove." A cold dread settled in my stomach. I knew what was coming, and I knew we were running out of time. The night sky lit up with an intense lightning storm, unlike anything I'd seen before. Purple-white bolts struck trees around the grove in rapid succession, exactly 27 strikes, the same circular pattern I documented when this all began. I could hear engines getting closer, shouting voices. The smell of gasoline carried on the wind. "Frank's brought a logging crew," I told Karen and Lisa, "with flamethrowers." Karen's eyes went wide. "The entity is fully awake now. If threatened, it will defend itself. People will die." "We need to complete the ritual," I said firmly. "It's our only chance to put the entity back to sleep before this gets ugly." Lisa nodded, the bark patches on her skin cracking as she moved. "I'll place the northern marker." As she walked toward the edge of the grove, I saw the first beams of flashlights penetrating the forest. Men's voices called to each other, the mechanical growl of chainsaws being tested. Karen suddenly gasped, clutching her chest. "It's calling me," she whispered. "It needs the seer now." Before I could stop her, she ran toward the center of the grove, where Hayes and Thomas had already merged with the growing mass of roots and branches. The entity was taking shape now, a massive humanoid form made of intertwined living wood, rising 30 feet tall at the center of the grove. Karen didn't hesitate. She walked straight into its embrace, the branches enfolding her. I heard her sigh with relief as the roots pierced her body, drawing her into the collective. Now I was alone, with Lisa somewhere in the darkness placing markers, and Frank's logging crew closing in. I ran to place the eastern marker, my grandfather's. The compass clutched tightly in my hand. The metal needle spun wildly as I approached the spot indicated on the map. I set the carved stone in place, feeling the ground vibrate beneath my feet in response. A shout rang out as the first of Frank's men spotted me. "There, by that big cedar!" I ducked behind the massive trunk as a spotlight swept the area. I needed to place 4 more markers before the circle would be complete. Lisa emerged from the shadows, moving stiffly as her transformation accelerated. "Western marker is set," she gasped. "I can feel the entity responding. It's—" A horrific scream cut through the night. One of the loggers had ventured too close to the awakened grove. Massive roots had erupted from the ground, wrapping around his legs and torso. His companions backed away in terror as he was rapidly pulled underground. "It's defending itself," Lisa whispered. Frank's voice bellowed from the darkness. "Light it up, burn it all." The first flames licked at the outer trees as men with flamethrowers began their attack. The entity responded immediately. The entire grove seemed to come alive at once, branches whipping down to grab men, roots erupting, to trip those who tried to run. The massive central figure split into smaller versions of itself, humanoid shapes of living wood stalking between trees with terrifying speed. Lisa grabbed my arm, her fingers now completely transformed into wooden tendrils. "I have to join now," she said urgently. "The builder and the innocent, we still need them or the circle won't hold." I watched helplessly as she staggered toward the center, the forest parting to let her pass. The entity welcomed her into itself, her body merging with the living wood. Of its form, men screamed as they were caught by the entity's smaller forms. Some were killed outright, crushed by massive wooden fists. Others were pinned down as roots pierced their bodies, beginning the transformation. I sprinted through the chaos to place the fourth marker, barely avoiding a grasping branch that snapped at my heels. As I set the stone in place, I felt the energy of the circle strengthening, a vibration in the air like a low hum. Frank appeared suddenly, face streaked with dirt and blood, eyes wild with fear and rage. "What have you done, Dan?" he shouted. Over the noise of men screaming and trees cracking. "What have you unleashed?" "I'm trying to put it back to sleep," I yelled back. "But the circle needs 7 anchors. We only have 4. A logger ran past us, fleeing from one of the wooden figures. It caught him with a branch-like arm, lifting him off the ground. Frank raised his flamethrower, but I knocked his arm aside. "Fire just makes it angry. It's protecting itself." "Then how do we stop it?" Frank demanded. I held up my grandfather's map. 2 more markers, then a final anchor at the center. "The keeper, that's me, has to complete the ritual." The look in Frank's eyes changed. "You're going to join that thing? Become like Hayes and the others?" I nodded grimly. "It's the only way to put it back to sleep." Frank stared at the chaos around us. Men being absorbed into trees, others fleeing in terror, fires spreading despite the entity's attempts to smother them. "I'll place the last 2 markers," he said finally. "You prepare whatever you need to do at the center." I handed him the carved stones and watched as he sprinted toward the 5th position. The entity seemed to sense our plan. The attacks on the remaining loggers slowed as its attention turned to us. I made my way toward the center of the grove, where the massive wooden figure towered above the trees. As I approached, I could see Hayes, Thomas, Karen, and Lisa. There, faces visible within the wooden mass, eyes open and aware. "We're waiting for you, Dan." Hayes' voice came from the entity, though his lips didn't move. "But we still need the innocent and the builder." "Frank is placing the final markers," I said, "but I don't know who." A scream of pain came from behind me. I turned to see Frank pinned against a tree. A branch pierced through his shoulder. Blood soaked his shirt. "Frank!" I ran to him. The entity had him firmly trapped, but hadn't begun absorbing him. Frank's face was pale with pain. "6th marker is placed," he gasped. "Couldn't reach the last one." I looked at the blood dripping from his wound. "The healer," I realized. "The entity wants you as the healer," Frank laughed bitterly. "I've spent my life finding lost people, saving them from the wilderness. I guess that counts." The branch pinning him began to change, sprouting smaller tendrils that worked their way into his wound. Frank groaned as the transformation began. "The final marker," I urged. "Where is it?" Frank nodded toward his pocket. I reached in and pulled out the last carved stone. "Innocent," he whispered as the wood began to spread through his body. "We need the innocent, someone untouched by hatred or fear of the forest." I looked around desperately. The remaining loggers had fled. There was no one left but me. A sound broke through the chaos, a voice calling my name. I turned to see a figure emerging from the trees. My son, David. Somehow, impossibly, he was here. "Dad!" he called, stumbling through the underbrush. "What's happening? I had these dreams. I felt like I needed to come find you." I stared in shock. "David, how did you even find this place?" He touched his chest. "I just knew, like something was pulling me here." The entity's massive wooden form turned toward him, branches reaching out but not threatening. testing, curious. The innocent, Frank, whispered, now half absorbed into the tree, the one untouched by knowledge of the entity, the new generation. I looked at my son, the boy who'd rejected the forest, who'd moved to the city, who knew nothing of our family's ancient pact with this place. Yet somehow the entity had called him here. David, I said carefully, I need your help. This forest, it's alive, more alive than you can imagine, and it needs us to help it go back to sleep. To my surprise, he nodded. I know, Dad. I've been dreaming about it for weeks. Trees talking to me, roots growing under my apartment. I thought I was going crazy. I handed him the final marker. Place this at the northwest corner of the grove. Then come to the center. Can you do that? David took the stone, looking at the ancient symbols carved into it. Grandfather's work, he said, recognizing it somehow. Then he vanished into the trees. I turned back to the center, drawing my grandfather's compass from my pocket. The needle now pointed steadily at the massive entity waiting there, its wooden faces watching me. I knew what I had to do. The needle of my grandfather's compass pointed steady and true toward the center of the grove, where the massive wooden figure waited. I walked forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. The faces of Hayes, Thomas, Karen, and Lisa watched me from within the wooden mass. Frank was almost fully absorbed now, only his face still visible in the trunk of a massive cedar. Dan, Hayes' voice came from everywhere and nowhere. The circle is nearly complete. We can feel it. The storm above intensified, lightning striking the trees around us in a perfect ring. The ground trembled beneath my feet. I reached the center and looked up at the towering form of the Grove Walker. Up close, I could see it wasn't just made of wood and roots. There were other faces embedded in its mass, dozens of them. Some fresh, some ancient features almost worn away by time, all the people it had taken over the centuries. I know what you are now, I said to it. You're the memory of this forest, its defense against time and destruction. A low rumble passed through the ground, almost like a purr of acknowledgement. My family was meant to keep you sleeping, to maintain the balance, but we were taken away. I touched the rough wooden surface. I'm sorry, but I'm here now. David appeared at the edge of the clearing, breathing hard. The stone is placed, he called. I felt something when I set it down, like electricity running through the ground. The circle was nearly complete. 6 anchors, 6 stones, all that remained was for me, the keeper, to join with the entity and close the loop. I turned to my son. David, there's something you need to know. Our family has a connection to this forest that goes back generations. We were its keepers, its protectors. I know, Dad, he said, surprising me. Grandfather told me before he died. What? But you were just a child, David nodded. He said someday I might hear the forest calling me, that when that day came, I should find you. The entity's massive form shifted, branches creaking as it leaned down toward us. A face formed in its center, not one of the absorbed humans, but a new face made of twisted bark and leaves. Keeper, it spoke, a voice like wind through ancient trees. The circle waits. I looked at my son, suddenly understanding. David, after I join with the entity, you'll need to maintain the circle. Place the offerings every season. Speak the words my grandfather taught you. You're not coming back? His voice cracked. I'll always be here, I said, touching his shoulder. Part of the forest you always claimed to hate. He smiled sadly. I never hated it. I was just afraid of loving it as much as you did, of being defined by it. The entity waited patiently as I embraced my son one last time. Then I stepped back and drew my knife. The final binding requires blood from the keeper, I explained, cutting my palm. Freely given. I pressed my bleeding hand against the entity's wooden core. The effect was immediate. Roots burst from the ground around my feet, wrapping around my legs and climbing upward. Unlike the violently captured loggers, I felt no pain, only a strange warmth spreading through my body. Maintain the circle, David. I said as the roots worked their way around my torso. The storms will come again in 60 years. Before then, you must find the next keeper to take your place. The entity's consciousness began to blend with mine. I could feel the others. Hayes's brilliant analytical mind, Karen's empathic sensitivity, Thomas's steadfast strength, Lisa's deep connection to the earth, Frank's protective instincts, and beyond them, dozens more stretching back centuries. It doesn't hurt, I told David as the transformation accelerated. It feels like coming home. The bark spread across my skin, replacing it inch by inch. I could feel my consciousness expanding, touching every tree in the grove, every root, every leaf. I could feel the birds nesting in the branches, the insects in the soil, the fungi spreading their networks between roots. David watched, tears streaming down his face as I was absorbed into the entity. But he didn't run. He stood his ground, accepting his new role. As the last of my human form merged with the wooden mass, the entity began to change. The massive humanoid shape sank back into the earth. The separate wooden figures throughout the grove melted back into the soil. The circle of stones hummed with energy, containing and binding the entity's consciousness. The grove walker was returning to sleep. My last human sight was of David placing his hand on the tree I was becoming, his lips moving in the ancient words. My grandfather had somehow taught him. Then my perspective shifted. I was no longer a man looking out at the world. I was the forest itself, ancient, patient, alive in ways humans can barely comprehend. And as the entity slumbered once more, I settled in to watch over my son and the forest for the next 60 years. Dawn broke over the grove, sunlight filtering through leaves that no longer moved with unnatural purpose. The storm had passed, leaving behind a forest that looked just like any other to the untrained eye. But David knew better. The Park Service investigation team arrived by helicopter around noon, setting up a perimeter around what they called the burn site. They asked the same questions over and over. What happened to the logging crew? Where were the missing researchers? How did the fire start? David gave them the answers his father had prepared him to give. Lightning strike, he said, his face convincingly weary, started a forest fire. The research team evacuated, but some of the loggers who came to help create a firebreak got trapped. My father led me in to look for survivors, but we were too late. They searched for bodies, of course. Found nothing but scorch marks and odd growth patterns they attributed to the fire's heat. 2 days later, they packed up and left. David returned to the grove alone that evening. He walked to its center, where a new tree stood, one that hadn't been there before. Its bark was smooth and dark, except for a section that looked almost like a man's face. "Hi, Dad," he said quietly, touching the bark. The branches above him swayed slightly, though there was no wind. In the months that followed, David quit his tech job in Seattle and applied to become a park ranger. No one questioned his qualifications. He seemed to know the forest better than people who'd worked there for decades. He established a special conservation area around the grove, citing unique ecological importance. Then he built a small cabin at its edge, just like his grandfather had once done. The forest thrived under his care. The hikers returned, walking trails that somehow never led them too deep into the grove. Those who did wander off track found themselves gently but firmly guided back to the main paths by fallen logs, dense underbrush, or the inexplicable feeling that they should turn around. Occasionally, someone would mention hearing whispers among the trees or seeing shapes moving. Just at the edge of vision, David would nod understandingly and suggest they might be experiencing the forest magic that made this place special. Once each season, when no visitors were around, he would place offerings at the 7 stone markers, pine cones arranged in patterns, small carved figures, bundles of herbs. He would speak the words his grandfather had taught him, maintaining the ancient pact. Dr. Hayes's university established a research station near the grove's edge. They discovered remarkable compounds in the plants there, medicines that could ease pain or speed healing. David made sure they never sampled too deeply or disturbed certain areas. The entity slept, its hunger satisfied by the 7 anchors who had given themselves willingly. But sometimes, during full moons or powerful storms, David could feel it, stirring. On those nights, he would sit by his father's tree telling stories of the outside world to the faces in the bark. "I met someone," he told the tree one autumn evening. "Her name is May. She's a botanist. She understands about this place somehow. I think you'd like her." The branches creaked in what might have been approval. 3 years after the incident, a young ranger transferred to the park. She came to David immediately, drawn by dreams of roots and ancient trees. She had Skokomish tribal ancestry and spoke of old stories about the forest that remembers. David recognized the signs. She would be part of the next circle, 60 years from now. He began teaching her what his father had taught him. Occasionally, a hiker would disappear near the grove, despite David's careful management of the trails. The searchers would find nothing. David would join the teams, guide them away from certain areas, knowing exactly what had happened. The forest needed to feed now and then, not often, just enough to keep the older, deeper hunger at bay until the next cycle. At night, in his dreams, David walked among the consciousness of those the forest had taken. His father was there, and Hayes, and the others from that fateful night. But also people from centuries past, trappers and loggers, indigenous hunters, lost travelers, all preserved, their memories and knowledge intact, sharing the collective mind of the ancient grove. They weren't suffering. They had become something greater than human, part of an ancient consciousness that remembered the ice ages, that had watched civilizations rise and fall, that would endure long after cities crumbled. 20 years later, David stood at the edge of the grove with his teenage daughter, Sarah. Her eyes, so like his father's, watched the trees with understanding beyond her years. "It's time you learned about your grandfather," he told her, taking her hand and leading her toward the center of the grove, where the circle of stones remained, hidden beneath moss and ferns, but still humming with ancient power. The branches above them swayed in greeting, though there was no wind.